At first glance, the dungeon looked deserted and harmless, but in reality everything was different. All sorts of creatures lived here, and some of them were slimy green goblins. Rowan took down a dozen of the creatures without even flinching. He shouted at Theo to finish off the remaining monsters quickly. He replied that there was no need to hurry. There was only one goblin left. Theo turned and cut the creature in half. Rowan noted that he hadn't expected to spend so much time dealing with these monsters. The next moment the earth shook, and a huge orc with glowing eyes appeared before them. Rowan screamed that they needed to retreat and look for the owner. But Theo rushed at the orc, shouting that he could handle it himself. And then someone shouted at Rowan and Theo to move away immediately. Ethan reached forward, clutching the golden card. A second later, a huge ball of fire appeared above his head. The ball rushed towards the orc and instantly swallowed him up. Rowan asked his master how he felt, and Ethan replied that he had spent almost all his mana on the orc. There was a time when he could only dream of such a level. Once upon a time, there was an ordinary guy who did nothing but sit under the covers, hiding from the whole world. But 3 months ago, the door to his apartment turned into a portal leading to a dungeon. At first, it all seemed rather strange. Entering the dungeon, Ethan even felt like a fantasy hero, but this feeling instantly disappeared as soon as I saw the first goblins. These creatures wanted only one thing: to kill him. The poison entered his bloodstream, and for several days he teetered on the brink of life and death. But he survived and received the status of a dungeon explorer. After this incident, Ethan hesitated for a long time to return to the dungeon and even searched for answers on the internet. Eventually, he found a website where people like him discussed training materials, weapons, and shared advice. Then he came across some quest ads, including his dungeon, which he was asked to complete together with other players. He was scared. Maybe the other players could cope without him. But we still had to go hunting. We desperately needed money. Now he knew, the deeper you go, the more terrible the monsters become. Ethan took on the regular goblins, and soon the system reported that only 5 of the group remained. But he couldn't shake the thought that these same creatures might come for him. And then he found a man with the same task, ready to fight side by side with him tomorrow. He was glad that he was alive and that there was still someone nearby to fight. Wrapped in a blanket to remain unnoticed, Ethan tracked down the 3 goblins. Choosing an opportune moment, he attacked one of them with a club at the ready. One blow was enough to knock the goblin out. The shield flew at the second one, knocking him off his feet. The third goblin grabbed his wounded comrade and started to run, but Ethan caught up with them. He threw the card onto the chest of the lying goblin and exhaled. Taking out a box cutter, Ethan hoped that everything would go well. He pricked his finger slightly and blood came out. He raised his hand over the map. When everything around him flashed blue, he realized it worked. Ethan suddenly felt a sick feeling in his stomach. In the end, he was left alone, and trying not to think about what was happening, he searched the site for at least something useful. But I only came across comments along the lines of, "There's no point in clinging to life. The only thing left to do is die." There was no choice, either fight alone or remain in the dungeon forever. In the meantime, an opportunity arose to evaluate one's own skills. After seeing the mana, concentration, and luck stats, he realized he was a mage. It was thanks to these abilities that he learned to subjugate goblins. But this could only be done a couple of times. The mana ran out. After a closer examination of the situation, something else came to light. Magic abilities were quite rare and were usually used in group raids, but then Ethan got scared and didn't dare to go into conflict within the group. Now he was alone. 272 days remained before the mission failed. He himself spent only 3 days in the dungeon. And then Ethan heard a creak behind the door. He swung the door open, ready to destroy the enemy with the tamed goblins. But there was no one there, only a box on the threshold. The employee asked if the president had sent another package. He replied that they needed to invest in their future, since most of them would die within a year anyway. But the survivors will become very strong. The president added that the amount is certainly not small, but the help in difficult times will certainly be remembered. Even if only 1% survives, the investment is worth it. The president was eager to know how it would all end. Ethan read the sender's name and recognized the president of the magic community. He had seen his posts on the site. The letter said the president was sending him 2 books because he believed Ethan was in a difficult situation. He looked at the reviews from people who had received the same books. They were not very flattering. Many called them fakes. The instructions warned that if the cover was removed, the book would most likely burn. But Ethan didn't check and simply mentally thanked the president for the gift. He sat down at the table and opened the book. Only after half an hour he managed to draw the correct magic circle. Magic turned out to be something like weaving. After drawing a pattern, you also need to hold the image in your head. It took Ethan 4 days to fully master both books. The system informed me that 20 hours were allotted for today's task, and if I failed, my level and skills would be lowered. Ethan had no choice but to go hunting. Descending into the dungeon, he immediately noticed several wild goblins. Ethan immediately ordered his tamed creatures to destroy them. The tamed goblins carried out the order without delay. A few minutes later, he managed to tame another one. After studying the books, managing mana became much easier. At that moment, other creatures appeared, skeletons with glowing eyes. Ethan managed to hide and wondered if he should try his magic on them. He read that to tame something, you need to mix your blood with the enemy's blood. But the skeletons had no blood, only bones. However, this did not stop them from using some abilities. Ethan decided to attack first and knock them out. All that remained was to figure out how to tame them. Unable to find the information he needed, Ethan decided to take a guess. He tried the same method that worked with the goblins. All that was required was to distribute the mana correctly. And then he realized what had worked, which meant he could trust himself and his feelings. Even though it took a lot more mana, Ethan realized he could now move forward. Having acquired a new ally, he decided to return home. At home, Ethan examined the skeleton carefully and realized that it was a female skeleton. He decided to give her a name. He walked up to the skeleton and said he would name her Mora. Ethan had been in the dungeon for 7 days now. 268 remained until the mission failed. The next morning he woke up, and all night long he dreamed only of battles. Suddenly, a skull appeared in front of Ethan and said, "Good morning." He was taken aback, and Mora explained that his mana had had a very strong effect on her. The skeleton said that after receiving the name, he remembered his past life. Ethan was eager to hear all the details. He asked how the name he had made up could be connected to her past. Mora replied that nothing happens without a reason. She added that a creature that receives a name moves to a new level and acquires its own personality. At one point, she lost both her personality and her soul, which is why she ended up in the dungeon. When asked if she knew who bore her former surname, Mora answered in the negative. She added that her memory has not yet been fully restored, but she remembers some things for sure. It was an extremely frightening creature. Ethan looked at Mora and realized that perhaps in the future he would have to fight something unknown. And if he dies, she risks losing her soul again. Mora touched Ethan with her bony hand and promised not to let her master die. He asked if she remembered anything else. Every little detail was important to him. She replied that she didn't have the strength to talk yet. She needed time to come to her senses. Ethan suggested searching the internet for information that could help her regain her speech and memory, and he himself began to study information about her. Ethan noticed that in addition to strength, magic, and mastery, his stats now also included a gift parameter. An idea occurred to him. If he developed magic together with Mora, he could stay behind in battle while the other skeletons fought on the front lines. Intrigued, Ethan looked at the skeleton and decided to buy Mora a computer. A little later, Mora said that in her past life, she was a witch and therefore would teach him magic. She taught him how to draw circles correctly, accumulate mana, and spend it wisely. Mora patiently pointed out all the mistakes, and Ethan learned a lot over the course of a week. He was eager to go down into the dungeon and try out his new knowledge. Mora said that the first thing to do is to tame as many goblins as possible. Having carried out the necessary calculations, she added that this amount of mana would be enough for now. Mora approached one of the goblins and said that she wanted to check something that concerned her personally. It reminded Ethan of how they once saved up mana before a sortie, but his mana reserves have not changed. The next moment, Mora grabbed the goblin and began to draw energy from him. Ethan didn't understand what was going on, but decided not to interfere. A minute later, Ethan noticed that Mora was okay. She hadn't disappeared. He added that after death, the desire to live becomes even stronger. Mora explained that she couldn't accumulate mana herself because she was already dead. And to become stronger, the undead have to take the lives of other creatures. To survive, she must kill, and this is monstrous. Ethan allowed Mora to kill for power. Otherwise, she would not be able to protect him. She looked at him and said that he was a very good person. Ethan replied that they simply needed to survive at any cost. Mora added that there are also zombies in the dungeon. Unlike her, they need to devour victims to become stronger. After that, Ethan checked Mora's parameters, but they had not changed. He decided that he needed to find an opponent stronger than the goblins. Suddenly, everyone saw a crowd of goblins running straight towards them. Mora told Ethan not to interfere. She could handle it herself. The next moment, she drew a circle in the air and created magic arrows. Arrows flew into the angry crowd, destroying several goblins. Mora was almost out of mana, and Ethan told her to rest and recover. He prepared for battle and led the tamed goblins towards the crowd. The creatures mixed together and a fierce battle ensued. The tamed goblins fought with all their might to protect their master. One of the monsters managed to break through to Ethan, but he immediately responded with a blow to the green muzzle. The goblins started to run, but Ethan ordered them to be caught. He gave chase and found that all his tamed goblins were dead and the fugitives had disappeared. Then Ethan realized his mistake. The goblins weren't running away, but luring him into their lair. He understood that there wouldn't be enough mana to subdue everyone, and then Mora appeared from behind. She said there was no point in grieving over the dead. These goblins were expendable anyway. Mora added that it is necessary to return and heal the wounds. At home, Ethan felt something strange and asked Mora what she was doing. She replied that she was using the first circle of healing magic, fast healing. Once the wounds had healed completely, Mora admitted that she had not expected to master this ability as an undead and was glad that it had worked out. She then leaned over to Ethan and asked if it was time to upgrade his gear. The next outing might be more dangerous. Ethan replied that even the basic set cost 150,000 won, but Mora said that was not enough. He replied that he simply didn't have the money for anything else, and Mora suggested opening a paid column with advice and making money that way. She added that one could publish advice on magic. There would certainly be many people willing to do so, and they would pay well. Ethan had no idea that knowledge could be exchanged for money. He thought that there would certainly be those who would find such advice useful. A little later, Ethan checked the bill and was stunned. Mora proudly announced that they could now afford to move. She explained, after payment, you need to provide the old address, then the new one, spend half a day in the dungeon, and then return to the new house. When Ethan said he wanted to be closer to people, Mora replied that that was exactly what they would do. After paying a deposit and signing a one-year contract, they moved into their new home 4 days later. Ethan walked out onto the balcony, wondering if the same person who sent the books was behind all of this. Mora came up from behind and reminded them that they had to go through a dungeon. He asked if there was another way, but she replied that perhaps there was such a way, but it was unknown whether it would be safer. She added that running away from problems is not the solution. Ethan shouted that he just wanted to get out of here, and he would. The next moment, everything around was illuminated by a bright blue light, and Mora realized that this was exactly what the owner's mana looked like. Now Ethan has another weapon, a mace, with which it has become much easier to confront enemies. Moreover, the mana hidden within his own body awakened. At home, Mora explained that her owner had adopted her precisely because she was able to overcome her own limits. She added that now he can safely be called a magician. From that moment on, Ethan officially became a first circle mage. He began to control the magic circle. This was necessary to complete the taming of the 2 captured skeletons. Ethan named them Theo and Rowan, but Mora suggested they take things slow. She added that there was no guarantee that the 2 would be as obedient as she was. After all, memories of past life and death manifesting in the undead can affect them in unpredictable ways. A couple of hours later, they returned to the closet where they kept the captured skeletons. Ethan walked over and opened the door. Mora touched one of the skeletons and said that its memory had returned. Ethan noticed that the skeletons seemed to understand, but were unable to respond. Mora explained that they don't have vocal cords, and that she herself is an exception. She turned to the skeletons and said that today they had another chance. Mora pointed to Ethan and explained that he was their new master, who had saved them and given them names. She added that Ethan was now in danger, just as their homeworld had once been in danger. And now Rowan and Theo have to do what they couldn't do in their past lives. Mora ordered the skeletons to swear allegiance to their master, otherwise they would die on the spot. Without saying a word, Rowan and Theo mentally swore an oath of allegiance to their master. Then one of them noticed that they could now speak, and they became a single team, united by a thirst for revenge. Ethan asked what revenge they were talking about. Theo replied that he still doesn't fully remember who he wants to take revenge on and for what, but he definitely has to find the one who killed him. Rowan remembered that his family had a family heirloom that was lost in the dungeon. When his older brother went after her, contact with him was lost. Now his goal is to find the relic and protect the family's honor. Mora revealed that she was a witch in her past life and now wants to continue studying magic to become stronger. Ethan realized that he also had something to share, gave his name, and added that his goal was to survive. He was once on the brink of death and does not want to experience that fear and pain anymore. He added that each of them, by achieving their own goal, helps to achieve his own. Mora, Rowan, and Theo replied that they were ready to help the owner and follow him. As he descended into the dungeon, Ethan was already looking forward to seeing his skeletons in action. Rowan remembered the oath he had taken and wanted to live up to his mentor's expectations. Theo showed incredible resilience and fearlessly rushed into the midst of the monsters. Thanks to their combined efforts, Ethan made much further progress this time and reached the boss's door. Someone who has been here wrote on the website that behind the door is the Goblin chieftain and 20 of his kin. Theo said it wouldn't be difficult and they could do it in about 5 minutes. But Rowan countered that he was being too self-confident. The boss was much smarter than the average monster. Mora added that she doesn't trust such sights at all and will prepare more thoroughly for the next fight. Ethan listened to Mora, and they all returned home to prepare for the fight with the boss. A few minutes later, he reported good news. Thanks to the battles, the characteristics and skills of the entire team had increased. After checking his own parameters, he discovered that he had reached the maximum level available. But Ethan believed that this was not enough. He needed to become even stronger. Rowan suggested that some magical crystal dust might come in handy for the next fight. Ethan went to the website and saw that 10 grams of the ingredient cost 1 million won. When Mora added that she would need a whole kilogram, he replied that he didn't have that kind of money. Mora insisted on her own and offered to buy everything necessary in installments. A few hours later, the package arrived. Mora mysteriously stated that she needed to make something and asked not to be disturbed. Knowing that it could take several hours, the others decided to go down into the dungeon without her. According to Rowan, about 300 creatures were destroyed, and today, the enemy turned out to be weak. Theo noticed that they had wasted almost all their luck. Here, Ethan remembered the luck parameter, which was supposed to help out in difficult situations. But Rowan noted that luck doesn't come for free. If it's favorable here, then in life, it will most likely be the opposite. Theo reminded that perhaps the reason there were no suitable skeletons was because the owner had exhausted all his luck with them. Back home, everyone was eager to know what Mora had been up to without them. But she replied that she hadn't finished yet. Mora tried several times to create the required ingredient, but today she was clearly having no luck. Ethan noted that perhaps it was because his luck had already been used up in the fight. Mora replied that the owner had nothing to do with it. It was entirely her own failure. She decided to go back to the room and try again. Although Mora promised a pleasant surprise, the others were burning with impatience to find out what was going on behind closed doors. Suddenly, the door swung open, and an irritated Mora declared that he was bothering her too. 3 days later, Ethan admitted that he was already starting to worry about her. Rowan and Theo advised me not to push and just wait. A few minutes later, Mora entered the room and announced that she was finished. She added that she had succeeded and showed something like a map. It was a spell card. Anyone could use it. Just imagine the spell, invest mana, and direct it to the card. Thanks to modern technology, Mora can now produce as many of these cards as she wants. She said the hardest part was turning ordinary paper into magical paper. Rowan and Theo asked if Mora had cast a spell on them too. Mora replied that she didn't have enough ingredients yet, but she would come up with something next time. A pleased Ethan suggested that everyone go down into the dungeon to level up. They quickly reached the door where the boss was waiting. Now that they had reached level 12, everyone felt more confident. Ethan walked over and opened the door. He entered first, warning the others to be on guard. And then a multitude of goblins poured out from behind the rubble. One of them, wearing a distinctive headdress, roared, and the entire horde moved towards the uninvited guests. Ethan immediately noticed that there were far more goblins than the website said. But Rowan was not at all fazed by this and rushed into the attack. Ethan told Mora that it was now her turn to play one of the cards. Both of them simultaneously pulled out their cards and mentally cast a spell. Fireballs immediately burst into flames in the air. The balls quickly rushed into the crowd of monsters, sweeping them away. Theo ran up to the survivors and shouted that the end had come for them. Having dealt with the ordinary goblins, all that remained was to fight the leader. Theo shouted that he could handle it himself, and at the same moment he thought that it wouldn't hurt to get a better weapon. He decided that if he lived to the point where he could afford it, he would definitely get it. Theo rushed at the boss again and asked the owner for help. Ethan drew another card and cast a new spell. The lightning-struck chieftain tried to escape, but Theo grabbed him tightly by the head. A few seconds later, Theo was already standing over the lifeless body of the monster. Rowan noticed the surviving and wounded goblins and said that they needed to be finished off. A little while later, Ethan lay on the ground, aware of only one thing: they had won. The system announced that a player named Ethan had been the first to clear the dungeon in 50 days and received a reward of 1,000,001. Tired and exhausted, they still returned home alive. Ethan decided to lie down and rest for a while. He almost dozed off, but when he opened his eyes, he saw a goblin's severed head in front of him. Ethan jumped up with a scream, realizing that he had fallen asleep right in the dungeon. He looked around and said it was time to go home. Ethan glanced at the app and noticed a new feature called Quick Exit. Mora suggested that the function appears after the boss is destroyed. Without thinking, he pressed the button, and a door immediately appeared in front of them. He was already reaching for the handle, but Mora got ahead of him. She advised against taking any risks until the door had been thoroughly checked. Ethan sat down on a rock and decided not to disturb Mora. He agreed that it was better to wait than to take risks. Ethan woke up to hear an argument about whether anyone had ordered anything from the website. Someone sent them another package, but everyone denied any involvement. Ethan carefully opened the box and saw a chainmail shirt inside. The letter congratulated him on his success in the dungeon and assured him that the gift was well-deserved. Ethan thought that if they had sent this before the boss fight, it would have been much more useful. He decided to somehow thank the sender, but he didn't know how. Mora suggested that one of the magic cards she had created would be perfect. The president called his assistant, who appeared in his office a few minutes later. The president recalled who was the only survivor from that group. He added that the guy was doing well, he was doing great at completing tasks, and sent him chainmail as a reward. The assistant exclaimed that it was incredibly expensive, but the president replied that money can't buy happiness. He added that he intends to continue to support this guy. Ethan donned his new chainmail and headed into the dungeon with his team. After defeating the boss, he moved to the second floor. Now, in addition to goblins and skeletons, there were also orcs here. Similar to goblins, but huge and fanged. At the master's command, Rowan and Theo rushed to attack. But on this floor, even ordinary creatures turned out to be much stronger. Theo pushed through the crowd of goblins and found himself face to face with an orc. Ethan shouted that another enemy had appeared from behind. Mora told Rowan and Theo to retreat on her signal. She took out a card and asked the owner to lend her some mana. After the required spell, a huge fireball appeared in the air. Mora gave the order to retreat. She aimed the ball straight at the orc, and immediately there was a powerful explosion. Ethan screamed that magic was working wonders. Both monsters were destroyed at once. Turning around, he saw that Mora, having spent all her mana, had literally crumbled like an ordinary skeleton. And Rowan was already carrying Theo on his back, whose legs had been torn off by the explosion. Ethan ordered them to return immediately. It was too dangerous to stay there. At home, Mora needed time to recover. Seeing Theo without legs, she promised to be more careful next time. Ethan regretted the loss of all the tamed goblins, but was glad that they had managed to escape on their own. He said that since the enemies on this floor were stronger, next time the fight would begin with a magical attack. Theo replied that they needed new, more powerful equipment. Rowan added that the skeletons were too light, making them harder to fight, and that additional armor would only make them heavier. Mora said there was another way, through the core itself. She explained that every undead creature has a core like a heart, and its destruction will kill even the strongest opponent. She added that, in addition, the undead do not feel pain, which makes them especially dangerous, and its core is their main vulnerability. That's why you need to aim exactly there in battle. Mora said that it was necessary not only to kill monsters, but also to obtain their cores. Ethan wondered if this would complicate matters even more. She replied that with the core, magical aura was now available, not just magical circles. He asked how she had done magic before. She replied that she had previously used the magic of her own bones, but now it was not enough. Ethan thought about it and agreed to try the method suggested by Mora. She said that the core needed to be made of something that could hold mana. A special metal core or crystals will do, but only crystals are currently available. Mora added that a 1-carat crystal was worth about 4 million won, and they currently had 30 million in their account. But the core requires a crystal with a diameter of at least 5 centimeters, and a carat is only 6 millimeters. Then Mora said there was a way out. She knows how to earn the required amount. With a kilogram of magic powder, you can make 100 cards and sell them for 3 million each. Ethan said there was no time to waste. Preparations had to begin immediately. He immediately sat down at the computer and put the cards up for sale. In less than an hour, Ethan had 450 million in his account. Mora said that now we can order the materials and start making the cores. Soon, cannonballs were installed in the chests of all 3 skeletons, and Mora announced that third circle magic was now available. She added that she bought cheaper artificial crystals, which reduced the effectiveness by 30%, but the entire process cost only 16 million won. Thus, each core contained 5 replaceable crystals. Mora suggested checking how the characteristics had changed. Ethan confirmed that skills have increased and a new parameter has appeared: mastery. He added that now the cores need to be tested in the dungeon. But Mora replied that there was no need to rush. First, it was worth checking them out of combat. Without wasting any words, Theo finished off the goblin and declared that he now possessed the ability Whirlwind Sword. Rowan then said that he would now show what he was capable of. His blade cut through the enemy as if he were a piece of butter. Theo was unwilling to give in and swung his sword again. But after a couple of seconds, he was exhausted, just like Mora last time. Mora noted that this method required a lot of mana. The problem is that recovery takes a long time. Ethan picked up Theo and offered to go home to sell the second batch of cards. It became clear that the road home would not be easy. A multitude of mouse gnomes poured out in front of them. Ethan admitted that they couldn't have done it without Theo. But Mora told him not to worry and used Lightning Strike. She then temporarily froze the dwarves with her icy breath. Rowan took advantage of the moment and pounced on the horde of creatures. Swinging his sword from side to side, he mowed down the entire crowd. Mora gave Ethan some advice. The mage mustn't panic, otherwise the spell would fail and it would cost him his life. At home, Ethan went to bed feeling pleasantly tired. And suddenly I found myself alone in a completely unfamiliar place. Suddenly, Ethan noticed a faint blue glow in his chest. He decided that it was just a dream and he just needed to wait until he woke up. And if it's not a dream, then such a surge of mana can be dangerous. The next moment, the sharp pain and growing glow became unbearable. Ethan wanted to stop it, but he couldn't do anything. The mana was out of control. A little more, and the heart is about to jump out or burst into pieces. Somewhere in the distance, he heard Mora's worried voice. He opened his eyes to see Rowan, Theo, and Mora looking at him in horror. Ethan sat up in bed and asked what happened. Mora said they noticed a strange glow coming from outside his bedroom door, and when they entered, they found it filling the entire room. She added that if he had not been woken up, he could have died in his sleep. Ethan asked if Mora had helped him, but she replied that the outbreak had stopped on its own. He wondered if he could learn to control such mana on his own. Ethan managed to master the mana and take control of the situation. Now he could control her completely. Mora noticed that the owner was becoming a real magician, although sometimes it was risky, and his magical body instantly jumped to the third circle, bypassing the second. Mora added that it is important to build on this success and begin mana management training today. Ethan suggested they have breakfast first, but Mora insisted that they needed to train first. On subsequent forays, he felt as if he had been born again. Mora warned that local enemies had been destroyed, but could return. When Ethan got out of the shower, Mora said everyone wanted to check his stats. He looked at their stats and noticed that they had already received new ranks. Mora became a skeleton sorceress, Rowan became a skeleton knight, and Theo became a skeleton warrior. He added that other indicators also increased. Theo noticed that it was noticeable, especially the change in height. Ethan looked at both skeletons, amazed by their impressive height. Mora said that she was changing too, but all the changes were happening inside her. She added that the owner's transition to the third round directly affected her as well. Ethan suggested that since everything had been improved, they should go to the second floor, but Mora said that it wasn't ready yet. He did not argue with the sorceress and decided to just wait. Theo added that his new weapon would only be ready in a week. Mora replied that she could improve it further with magic. And then the day came when Theo received new armor. Mora explained that after the upgrade, the armor now had instant recovery. She added that she also improved Rowan's sword. It is now sharper and self-sharpens. Mora said that she also had a gift for the owner. It turned out to be a cloak with protective and restorative properties. She added that she also expanded the capacity of his pockets. And although all this equipment is not cheap, it is still considered consumable. And Theo was already eager to test the new armor in battle. Mora replied that they were now ready to descend into the dungeon and move on. The detachment had covered a considerable distance when they suddenly heard a crackling sound. It turned out to be goblins led by a huge orc. Theo declared that it was finally time for the real hunt. Mora drew a card and threw a fireball into the crowd. Theo was indignant, reminding him that he had once, through carelessness, deprived him of his legs. Ethan asked not to sort things out, but to deal with the surviving goblins before they called for reinforcements. One goblin managed to escape, and Theo was angry that he was not allowed to take revenge. 119 days had passed since the beginning of the exploration of the dungeon. 156 remained until the failure. Rowan went on reconnaissance to find out where the orc had escaped. He returned half an hour later and reported that the fugitive had called for help, about 50 of his relatives. To save mana, Ethan suggested destroying them all at once. The squad moved forward a little and discovered something like a door. Apparently there was another lair hidden here. Mora cast a spell and Ethan launched a fireball forward. Some of the creatures were destroyed, while the rest were enveloped in thick smoke. Then the mouse gnome rushed at them. Ethan didn't lose his composure and fired a magic arrow at him. Spears and swords flew after her. Although there were many creatures, some of them were still neutralized. Theo shouted that it was his turn and rushed into the angry crowd. Rowan rushed to his aid, sword at the ready. Realizing that the enemy was too much for them, the goblins scattered in all directions. Ethan struck the ground with his staff, and a stone wall rose in front of the creatures, blocking their path. Mora shouted that it was time to use ice lightning. The goblins were instantly riddled with ice shards. Theo reported that they also dealt with the mouse gnomes. Ethan came over and asked how the new team was doing. The skeletons replied that everything was fine, but there was a small problem. The problem was that there were too few enemies. Mora said that was enough for today, and it was time to go home. At home, she said she wanted to talk to the owner, and Ethan asked the other skeletons to wait outside. Left alone, Mora said that the conversation was very important and asked Ethan to sit down. She reminded him that all this time she had been teaching him different magical directions and asked which of them was the easiest. Ethan admitted that studying is difficult and he gets tired quickly. Mora replied that it was important for her to know as much as possible because soon she would have to choose one direction. She asked if he had already decided which direction to choose. Ethan replied that he had already decided and chosen a specific direction. He would like to take up Nyctomancy seriously. This discipline is based on the summoning of undead, the creation of golems and chimeras. It also includes the creation of curses, poisons, and antidotes. This school of magic is considered the fifth most important but extremely dangerous. Mora said that it was too early to choose this direction. The owner did not yet know all the intricacies. But Ethan reminded her of her own words. Once she took the oath, her mana level would rise to the level of the chosen direction. Mora confirmed this, but added that it would then be more difficult to master other schools, and it would be impossible to change direction. Ethan replied that he trusted his decision. He added that he had two good reasons for this. Firstly, this school was easier for him than the others, or so it seemed to him. And secondly, next to him are Mora, Rowan, and Theo. Ethan said he didn't believe their meeting was a coincidence. Mora once again reminded that discipline is very difficult and the owner may be rejected in society. Ethan replied that he hoped to avoid this and chose the Nyctomancy. Rowan and Theo, who had been eavesdropping outside the door, couldn't stand it any longer and burst into the room, declaring that the owner had made an excellent choice. Mora said she would no longer try to dissuade him. Ethan began to recite the oath, and the entire room lit up with a bright blue light. Mora said that now that he was officially a nectomancer, she hoped for the best for him. Ethan asked where he could get books on nectomancy. Mora replied that all the necessary literature is on the website. But the books are very expensive, from 5 to 20 million won, depending on the circle of magic. Mora added that they can now afford next-level books. She said that people come into this world empty-handed and leave, leaving everything they have acquired behind, so there is no need to be afraid to spend money during life. After descending into the dungeon, Ethan asked not to interfere. He wanted to test his new abilities alone. Having destroyed the skeletons, he began to raise skeleton archers from them. Now he had a small army of tamed and raised skeletons. Ethan said he might get a few more. Rowan expressed hope that the new fighters would be stronger than those on the first floor. But then a multitude of mouse gnomes appeared, and Ethan ordered an attack. The quick and alert archers immediately carried out their master's order. They not only shot with bows, but also fought bravely in hand-to-hand combat. Ethan noted that it turned out to be quite easy, and Theo added that with a good weapon they would have dealt with it much faster. Mora asked if his mana was okay, and Ethan said yes. The president noted with irritation that not a single player in the guild had completed the task. Assistant Tyler said they still have to buy those cards. The president ordered the delivery of the already purchased batch. A minute later, he looked at the return address and recognized the salesman as the same guy they had once helped. The president said he would personally examine the cards and ordered Tyler to buy more. He added that it would be much more useful to establish our own production. Mora reported that the next batch of cards sold out instantly and more needed to be made. She added that competitors had appeared and showed their cards on the website. Mora stated that for now it is just a fake, but competitors will quickly figure out the technology and start producing higher quality products. Therefore, while there is a head start, you need to sell as many real cards as possible. As they descended into the dungeon, Mora warned that demons and slimes might be present on the third floor. Ethan replied that he had read about being careful with them. Their poison could corrode equipment. Rowan noted that this was unlikely to be the case. The previous floors were already different from what was described on the website. And although the boss of the second floor turned out to be strong, we managed to deal with him. It took a lot of effort to defeat the Orc Mage, the boss of the third circle. Mora lamented that she had not been able to tame him then. Rowan noticed something was wrong. The monster should have shown up by now. Mora replied that she also did not feel anyone's presence. Ethan said he would send out ghosts to scout the area. He cast a summoning spell. A small group of ghosts immediately appeared, and Ethan explained the task to them. It is quite possible that the monsters are hiding and preparing an ambush. Ethan closed his eyes and mentally connected with the ghosts. A minute later, he announced that we needed to look for a large arched opening. Ethan had a rough idea of the direction and led the squad himself. Soon he came to the door he had seen during his meditation. Ethan said that this must be the boss room. That's where he felt the presence of monsters. Judging by the reviews on the site, no one has gone this far yet. Mora replied that she also felt undead there, and much stronger ones at that. She could even die. Ethan suggested sending the ghosts there first. He began to follow their progress through mental communication. Suddenly, a strange silhouette appeared in his head. What he saw made his legs give way, and he fell to the ground. It turned out to be a winged, skeletal monster. I had to return home to prepare, and not die. Mora asked him once again what he saw there. Ethan didn't know how to describe what he saw, and said that it was the skeleton of a dragon with white wings. Mora replied that the description sounded like a bone dragon. She added that there are several types of dragons, each with its own characteristics. The bone dragon has white bones and is capable of freezing everything around it with its cold. Ethan replied that he saw an ordinary skeleton, nothing like ice. Mora assumed that then it was not the dragon itself, but an undead creature made of dragon bones, or rather a dragon skeleton. She added that they usually take a long time to form, and that creature had not yet reached the limit of its power. Mora then outlined her theory about the dungeon's capacity. According to her version, the strength of monsters depends on their number in each sector and is distributed among all inhabitants. Ethan noted that since there was only one creature in the room, it must be very strong. He added that, in any case, it is necessary to move forward. From the next day, intensive preparations began for the meeting with the skeleton dragon. 3 months later, they descended into the dungeon again and found themselves in front of a familiar door. Ethan warned that the fight would be tough and opened the door. The leader's skeletal guards immediately crawled towards him. Ethan cast a spell and summoned his allies. A minute later, the tame skeleton warriors stood up to the dragon's guards. The main monster flared red and tried to subjugate the alien warriors. Ethan shouted that this number wouldn't work. The boss jumped up and, surrounded by his henchmen, rushed at the uninvited guests. Rowan and Theo knew they had to be prepared. Rowan took out several colored balls and said that these bombs were prepared for the monster in advance. A second later, a powerful explosion thundered and everything around was engulfed in flames. Rowan told the owner that there weren't enough skeletons and more reinforcements were needed. The more damage the dragon took, the more reinforcements he called upon. Theo screamed that his mana was draining too quickly, but Rowan told him not to complain and to put all his strength into the attack. Theo hit with the mace, it broke, and he continued fighting with his bare hands. The next moment he was thrown back, the dragon used the power of light. Ethan and Mora slammed their staffs on the ground and summoned clay golems. The invulnerable golems surrounded the dragon and began to suck all the life force out of him. Now only the dragon's head was sticking out of the viscous clay mass. Mora immediately created a fireball and threw it at the monster. When the smoke cleared, everyone saw that the dragon's head had been torn off. Mora declared that the monster was killed, the core in its head was destroyed. But it was too early to celebrate. The creature was still alive. The skeletal dragon wasn't supposed to be on this floor of the dungeon at all. The real boss here was supposed to be the orc necromancer, but due to the intervention of other players, he found himself on the brink of death. Sensing his imminent death, he created a skeletal dragon. But at some point the orc's powers ran out, and control over creation was lost. Trying to survive, the dragon learned to absorb everything around him, the creator, the monsters, and the very energy of the dungeon. Despite this, he never achieved his final form. He lacked the core in his head. But this did not stop him from restoring his skeletal body. Ethan told Mora to prepare for another attack. They needed to buy time. He added that the mana was about to run out. Here, completely exhausted, Theo shouted that the master could take his mana. Ethan agreed, but even that wasn't enough. There was only one way left to replenish strength. Use your own blood. Filled with mana, Ethan felt as if he had lost something important. He understood that his life had been shortened, but what good was the future if the present disappeared? Rowan shouted that he still had bombs left and threw them at the dragon. The explosion did not help, and the clay golems moved towards the monster again. Then Mora shouted for everyone to dodge as the dragon released its breath. Ethan barely managed to cover himself with a protective cloak. A minute later, he opened his eyes and saw that all his friends were dead. Seeing the skeletal dragon in front of him, he realized, this is the end. But then Ethan remembered his telekinesis and soared into the air. There was almost no mana left, there was no room for error. Ethan extended his hand and demanded that the dragon surrender, bow, and acknowledge him as master. The monster replied that he would never recognize the pathetic little man as his master. Ethan shouted back that what stood before him was nothing but a pile of bones, a pathetic impostor. But this is precisely what gives him a chance to become stronger than any real dragon. Otherwise, they both will have to die. Ethan quickly flew up close and touched the monster's head. Having used up the last drops of mana, he lost consciousness and collapsed to the ground. Ethan woke up to find himself in the bony clutches of a monster. The dragon's eyes changed color, and he reminded him that the master must keep his word and make him stronger than real dragons. Ethan himself didn't believe that he had survived, but he succeeded. The task was completed in 329 days. At first glance, it looked like an ordinary high-rise building in the Gangnam district, but in reality, it housed a secret organization that supported underground explorers. Ethan reported that he had arrived with a report on the completed mission. The manager replied that the task was quite simple and no report was required. However, Ethan insisted that the raid was unusual and asked for the decision to be reconsidered. The manager picked up the thick folder and wondered what could have happened there. After studying the documents, he still couldn't understand how this guy managed to defeat the skeletal dragon on his own. After looking through the papers, the manager realized that in front of him was not just a necromancer mage, but the very same seller of magic cards. He called his assistant and told him to provide Ethan with all possible assistance. Ethan knew that if the dragon had not listened and had not used his breath in time, everything would have ended in death. Morris said that it was all over. She, Rowan, and Theo had managed to recover, albeit with great difficulty. He added that he had to transfer the cannonballs from his chest to his head and then separate them from his body to avoid the monster's attack. But fortunately, everything worked out. Everyone survived and the dragon was tamed. Then Ethan heard the monster's voice, declaring that it was not tame at all, and he himself agreed with this. Moore told the dragon that his name was now Noctis, and that his master would keep his promise and make him stronger. The dragon replied that if the promise was not kept, he would kill Ethan. Ethan looked out the window, really wanting to get outside, even if just for a little while. Moore replied that the owner could come out at any moment, but it would still take half a month to recover. Then Rowan and Theo came in, and seeing that the owner was feeling better, asked if he wanted to go for a walk. Mora told the owner that she needed to take care of some chores, making maps and repairing equipment. The next day, Ethan opened the door and walked out of the apartment. He didn't go outside for almost a year. Ethan wandered around the noisy city until dark. The taxi driver noticed that the guy seemed to have recently arrived in Seoul. He added that there are many beautiful places here, but it is better not to go outside after sunset. The taxi driver said that recently many people have been going missing, and pools of blood are found at the scene of their disappearance. Ethan wondered if it had something to do with the dungeon monsters. Later, Mora announced that she had finished all her chores and boasted at the same time they had moved to a new house. It was a spacious 2-story apartment. There's room in this house for Noctis the dragon. Moreover, there was a mana vein flowing right under the house. Rowan and Theo came over to ask when they were going to the dungeon. Ethan looked at the app and said there was a new task. The description said that the term was 400 days and that it was more dangerous than before. Rowan noted that now with the dragon, it would be easy. Ethan warned against naivety. There might be monsters stronger than Noctis. He added that training cannot be stopped and one must always be on guard. Dong-wook was unable to cope with the monster and lost his arm in the battle, bleeding to death. It all started with the fact that his apartment also turned out to be connected to the dungeon. It was scary at first, but there were always other players like him around. The friends even founded a guild, but many of them later died. He had often dreamed of creating the strongest guild in the world, and now Dong-wook was lying on the ground next to a horned monster that was devouring one of his friends. At that moment, someone nearby whispered whether he needed help. The voice ordered him to speak more quietly and added that he would help in exchange for information. Dong-wook replied that he was new to the 3rd floor and that the monster was a wandering boss that the quest didn't say much about. The voice replied that 10 minutes would be enough to finish off this creature. The next moment, the skeletons moved towards the boss. Suddenly, the monster raised a cloud of dust and disappeared from sight. Dong-wook saw a masked stranger in front of him, who stated with displeasure that he had let this creature escape. Here, Dong-wook shouted to the stranger that the monster was already behind him. The next moment, the monster was crushed to death and did not even touch the stranger. Dong-wook exclaimed that it was a bone dragon in front of him. The stranger approached and replied that it was a skeleton dragon, still weaker than a real bone dragon. He added that the time would come when he would become stronger than all the monsters. The masked man again offered to help the poor man with the severed arm. He added that he was ready to make a deal with him. Dong-wook replied that he would give him whatever he asked for. The stranger pointed at him and said that his soul alone would be enough. He added that he was ready to reciprocate if he agreed to the contract. Of course, it was hard to believe this, so I had to prove it with action. The stranger sat down next to the wounded man and used healing magic. Dong-wook looked at his hand and couldn't believe his eyes. He looked at the masked man and agreed to sign the contract. That day, Ethan found many more wounded and took in 21 souls. He told me to remember 2 rules. Keep quiet about what happened and give him mana crystals from each raid. Ethan later gave the new recruits a book with information about spell cards. Rowan was surprised that anyone could even enter into such contracts. Ethan replied that for self-defense, one must build up one's own strength. He added that the main condition was silence. No one should know what connected them. At that moment, a notification about a new task arrived on the phone. The task was completed within 500 days, and the reward was 5 million won. Theo continued walking, annoyed that he hadn't encountered any monsters yet. Then Ethan told everyone to stop. He felt something. He closed his eyes and said that there were other dungeon explorers nearby. People. It's about 20 minutes walk to them. One has a crossbow. The others also have weapons. Ethan put on a mask and told everyone to be on guard in case of an attack. They continued on their way and soon came across a group of explorers. One of the boys extended his hand, introducing himself as Pop Min, the head of the clan. Ethan shook hands and introduced himself as Darian. Park Min asked who was on his team. Ethan replied that in the first task he managed to tame the undead. He expressed admiration and offered to join the clan. Magicians, he said, work well as a team. Park Min led him to the others to introduce him and tell them about the meeting. At home, Ethan researched the clan further and learned that 16 of its members had died. Theo noted that this was not surprising. The level of most researchers was low. It's amazing how the rest of them survived at all. Theo found information about Pa Ming online and passed it on to his owner. He added that the clan cannot be ignored. By uniting, the remaining members will become much stronger. Rowan admitted that he didn't want to trust this Park Min at all. Ethan said he didn't like this leader either. Rowan added that the guy was suspicious and the entire clan did not inspire confidence. Theo added that he had seen the faces of people who had only nice things to say to the boss, but their looks told a completely different story. Morris stated that these were just guesses and that one should not rely solely on impressions. Theo was indignant. Did Mora really trust Pop Min? She replied that she just wanted to make sure first, but she already had reasons not to contact him. Ethan listened to everything and completely agreed with Mora. He said that Pak Min's team must be disposed of before it is too late. On the website, they found his post calling for everyone to join the mission and meet at a designated place on a designated day to discuss the plan. Morris said there were 3 days to prepare. 3 days later, Pa Min gathered those who wished to participate in a safe place in the dungeon. He announced that since everyone was gathered, the speech could begin. Pak Min spoke about the dangers of the upcoming mission and about his fallen comrades. He spoke about his squad ready to fight monsters but which lacked people. But this doesn't mean the dungeon is impassable. You need to combine your strength and skills to increase your chances. Pak Min paused and added that there was a problem: money. There is a bonus for killing monsters, of course, but with so many people, each person's share will drop significantly. This can lead to discord within the group. Therefore, to avoid chaos, Park Min proposed creating a guild with a clear division of responsibilities. Ethan listened carefully and now figured out the guy's true intentions. Park Min has already put forward his candidacy for the post of guild leader. He stated that there was a compelling reason why he should become the head. Pak Min confidently declared that he possessed a superpower. In addition, he has the ability to subjugate, which allows him to control those who are lower in level. But it does not work on those whose level is higher. Park Min promised to diligently develop this skill for the sake of the guild's strength. Together they will eventually create the most powerful and invincible clan. He promised to level up everyone who joined the guild. Hearing the incredulous whispers, Pa Min decided to demonstrate this in practice and asked for a volunteer. Having received consent, he offered to test the skills of the applicant. The next moment, the volunteer's treasure hunting skill increased by 1 level. Park Min stated that the further they progress together, the faster their skills grow. He firmly stated that he was ready to take the oath on mana right now. Such an oath cannot be broken, otherwise you can not only lose all your strength, but also die from it. Pak Min promised to never give his subordinates meaningless tasks. The crowd listened to the leader with admiration, already ready to follow him. Ethan clapped his hands and everyone turned to look at him. He said that he already knew about Park Min's plans to create a guild, but he wanted to hear the answer to his question. Ethan asked if Park Min's influence would increase if he upgraded his subordinates. Park Min confirmed this, but added that his subordinates would be able to resist if their level exceeded his own. Ethan said he now understood how 16 of his team members died. They tried to resist, but ended up dying because of his own orders. Park Min tried to object that he had not personally killed anyone. And if Darien doesn't believe, let him also take an oath on mana. Ethan agreed that Park Min himself, of course, did not kill anyone, but it was he who ordered the dead to kill each other. Ethan turned to the crowd and said that Park Min used to be an ordinary dungeon explorer. He was no different from the other players, but somehow he gained superpowers and subjugated those who were weaker. Park Min shouted that this was nonsense and that Darien had no evidence. He began to accuse Ethan of wanting to curry favor at his expense, while he himself, he said, was afraid to even take off his mask. Here Ethan confidently replied that he had evidence. Park Min laughed and told the crowd that the guy was just bragging. His people tried to protect him, assuring him that they survived only thanks to him. Ethan replied that this was a misconception and promised to prove otherwise. He struck the ground with his staff and cast a resurrection spell. The next moment, all 16 dead clan members rose to their feet. Ethan claimed that he was a necromancer and had extensive magical abilities. Pak Min shouted that it was just magic tricks and a light show. He stated that Darien was also aiming to become the leader of the guild, wanting to subjugate everyone for his own benefit. But people no longer trusted Pa Min, confident that he would treat them the same way he treated the dead. The crowd shouted that they would never elect him as the guild leader. Pak Min couldn't stand it any longer. He drew his sword and rushed at Ethan. But Theo came to the rescue and stopped the blow. Pak Min shouted to his remaining supporters to destroy Darien and his team. Subordinates rushed to help their leader. Rowan shouted that they needed to be stopped, but without harm. They themselves were not guilty of anything. A minute later, it became clear that the enemy was stronger than it seemed. Pak Min laughed, noting that they would be no match for his men. Mora decided it was time to intervene and took out a magic card. Pak Min's men were scattered throughout the area. Pak Min shouted that he would now show all the power of submission. He encouraged his men and gave them even more strength. Pak Min shouted that now Darien had only one choice, to kill them if possible. Rowan and Theo began to fight back again. Mora drew a second card and fired ice arrows. Pak Min, waving his sword, shouted that now Darien's bony toys would fight on his side. But Ethan replied that he had chosen the wrong opponent. The next moment, Noctis appeared and grabbed Pak Min with his huge paw. An army of summoned skeletons clung to the legs of Pak Min's men, preventing them from fighting. It took several minutes to neutralize all of his men. Ethan said that if he hadn't figured out Pa Min's plan, things might have turned out differently for him. He raised his staff over the head of the fallen man, and he, begging for him to stop, finally realized everything. Ethan answered the question of whether he forgave the dead who were begging for mercy. With these words, he abruptly brought his staff down directly on Pak Min's head. Ethan hadn't left the bathroom for half an hour. He couldn't come to terms with the fact that he had killed a man. He couldn't stop thinking about it, much less forget it. From behind the door, he heard the crew discussing how the owner had done the right thing. Otherwise, many more people would have suffered. Ethan considered himself no better than Pak Min, since he also subjugated the undead for profit. He opened the door and said that he wanted to be alone today. He went into his room, and closing the door, collapsed onto the bed. Ethan tried to convince himself that there was no other way out, otherwise they themselves would have died. The next morning, he was awakened by skeletons entering the bedroom to announce that the owner had moved to the fourth circle. Ethan sat on the bed, not understanding when it happened. After all, they didn't kill monsters. Mora explained that the master's determination yesterday had elevated him to the rank of a fourth circle mage. He wondered if the promotion had come precisely because he had admitted his guilt. Mora took his hands and told him not to blame himself for the way the new level had come about. She added that there had been too many events and everyone could use some rest. Mora said that the dungeon is full of people now. After their departure, the remaining players banded together and eventually formed their own guild. But they still haven't found a worthy leader, and now they're looking for Ethan. He just grinned. He solved the problem brilliantly and saved people from danger. The president already knew about the incident from players' posts on the website, but he couldn't understand how the skeleton dragon ended up in this dungeon at all. After all, this monster is at least of the sixth circle. Tyler noted that only an extremely talented and powerful magician could tame such a creature. The president turned to his assistant and said that this meant that such a player already existed. And the site is already full of confirmation of this. Many people are telling the same thing. He added that he no longer rules out the existence of a 5th or 6th level necromancer. Ethan decided that since they weren't going into the dungeon yet, it was worth spending the time usefully. Theo attacked the owner, advising him not to dodge the blows, but to parry them. By the 4th lap, Ethan's strength and speed had increased, and he could now anticipate his opponent's movements. It seemed as if he had become a completely different person. Rowan, sitting at the computer, reported that 13 more people had died in the dungeon. He added that the guys from the Norma Guild were hasty and are still looking for a leader. Mora noticed that Ethan was deep in thought and said that it was better to focus on upgrading his skills for now. Even if the owner wants to return to the dungeon, it is better to just accept it. Ethan replied that he wasn't planning to go there yet. Mora replied that since the training was complete, they could prepare for the next sortie. Yuna had the same nightmare over and over again. In his dream, Pot Min again subdued her and forced her to attack monsters. She woke up and sat up in bed. She knew the leader was dead, but she still saw him in her dreams. Yuna remembered that last battle in which she survived. Through the mask, she heard Darian's words. With Pa Min's death, the real torment would only begin. Darian grabbed the leader and threw him into the crowd of the resurrected. He said that they were free to do whatever they wanted with him. That day, Yuna realized that she could move, that she was alive. The next moment, she saw the ghost of her sister among the resurrected. Yuna fell to her knees in front of her and cried, feeling guilty for her death. The ghost smiled and said that the sister had to survive for both of them. Yuna clenched her fists. There was no point in sitting at home and crying. She needs to become stronger and more resilient. Ethan looked at the plan Mora had drawn up and asked why they needed a base. She replied that there were too many dungeons in the world and it was impossible to go through them all. If she makes a mistake along the way, other explorers risk becoming undead, just like her. And it is quite possible that one day monsters from the dungeons will penetrate this world. Ethan remembered the taxi driver's words about how it was dangerous to go out at night and how many people disappeared without a trace. Mora added that the base is needed to protect survivors, a safe haven for researchers who need help. Ethan replied that construction needed to begin as soon as possible, but Mora noticed that there was one more question. She explained that the cards are not selling very well at the moment, and that their production is expensive. Mora added that most people still buy cheap knockoffs. She suggested starting a business selling magical artifacts. Ethan replied that competitors would still try to figure out the production technology. Mora said that it was easier with the cards, but she will try to give it her all with the artifacts. She added that with the owner's active participation, things would go much faster. The next day, lessons on creating magical artifacts began. Mora tried to be patient, but she still punished Ethan from time to time. The punishment was a potion, disgusting to taste, but good for the body. The taste combined sweetness, salt, bitterness, and spiciness all at once. The training lasted for 3 months. Mora stated that the owner was now ready to fight the new boss. Unable to find a more worthy candidate, the researchers chose Yuna as the head of the guild. She stated that they would not wait for anyone and would solve the problem themselves. Yuna gave an inspiring speech to the audience, and then footsteps were heard in the distance. It turned out to be Darian and his team. 108 days had passed since the start of the quest. All that remained was to defeat the boss. Yuna greeted Darian, noticing that she hadn't had time to introduce herself last time. She thanked the magician for helping to free her sister. Ethan replied that he didn't expect gratitude, he just wanted to expose Park Min. Yuna asked if Darian and his team were ready to join the guild to defeat the boss. She added that she was ready to pay for help. Yuna opened the box with banknotes and magic crystals. She explained that there was 1,000,001 and 5 mana crystals. Ethan replied that he had no need for such a sum and suggested dividing it among the others. He added that he was ready for long-term cooperation with the guild. Yuna shook his hand and laid out her plan. The plan was for melee fighters to act as shields, while ranged fighters would deal damage from afar. Ethan realized that Yuna's plan was simple, but flawed. He said there was a huge werewolf and about 100 smaller creatures behind the door, so the plan wouldn't work. Ethan proposed his strategy, and soon the guild, along with his squad, was ready to enter the boss's hall. At the far end of the hall sat a werewolf, and in front of him lined up a huge army of all sorts of creatures. The werewolf let out a threatening roar, and the mouse creatures were the first to attack. Yuna ordered to put up a protective barrier. On her orders, the first and second squads threw explosive devices at the enemy, but the creatures managed to hide behind shields. The third and fourth squads immediately released fireballs into the crowd, and then horned centaurs emerged from the flames. Yuna shouted to Darien to take charge of the bulls. Ethan immediately ordered the warriors to prepare bone spears. The guild members, covered by shields, went on the offensive. Then spinning projectiles flew towards them. In an instant, the shield wall collapsed. Someone shouted that the bulls were charging again. At Yuna's command, fiery arrows flew at them, but one of the monsters managed to break through the defense. Yuna shouted at the fighter not to give up and to fight to the end. Ethan then ordered everyone to retreat. His warriors surrounded the enemy, cutting off their escape route. Then Ethan summoned Noctis. He ordered the dragon to use the breath. It was a dark breath. Yuna was horrified by what she saw. There was no trace left of the centaurs. She walked up to Darien, who said he wasn't finished yet. New shadows appeared in the smoke. This was the werewolf's second army. Yuna told everyone to rally and prepare for a new attack. The first to appear were archers with crossbows. They managed to mow down the first ranks of the enemy, but new monsters were already advancing. Ethan didn't want to risk his people and sent out an army of skeletons. Distributing his forces, he shouted that he would take care of the centaurs and let Yuna deal with the mouse creatures. Ethan ordered Rowan and Theo to attack the centaurs, and Mora used lightning. The monsters received many wounds, but thanks to regeneration, the wounds healed right before our eyes. But Ethan insisted there was still a chance of winning, and he threw Rowan and Theo into the attack again. The centaur began to fight off the blows, but Rowan seized the moment and wounded the monster. He didn't give the creature the slightest chance or time to regenerate. But the monster recovered, and Theo shouted that his head had to be cut off. But the creature covered itself, not allowing anyone to reach its neck. Rowan tried to get behind him, but the monster immediately changed its position. Mora shouted that she would try to help. She drew a card and cast a shackle spell. The monster immediately shackled his hands and feet, depriving him of the ability to move. Rowan flew over the monster's head and raised his sword. A second later, the creature's head was already lying on the ground. Ethan noticed something shiny and picked it up. Moore said that this was a moon crystal, very valuable, which would still be useful in the future. At this moment, Yuna managed to destroy one of the monsters. She told the others not to give up and to continue the attack. The mouse creatures tried to escape, but they were not given the chance. Theo immediately blocked their path and dealt with them all in a matter of minutes. Yuna watched as the undead skillfully carried out Darien's orders. Ethan announced that the dungeon was cleared. The entire guild rejoiced, still not believing in victory. Yuna looked at Darien and said that without him, they wouldn't have been able to do anything. She asked about his future plans. Ethan replied that he helps those in need, but goes his own way. He gathered his team and headed for the exit. Yuna shouted after them that in 3 days they would go up to the second floor. One of the fighters remarked admiringly that it would be great if Darien helped them again in the next fight. Yuna smiled and announced that everyone could now go home to rest. Ethan asked Mora if the crystal was really that valuable. She replied that in her world, this object is called the Eye of God, which illuminates the darkness. When the moon turned red, all the monsters turned into truly evil creatures. But as soon as the color changed to blue, the monsters changed too. This means that this crystal can be used in different ways. Mora mentioned werewolves, noting that their powerful regeneration allows them to surpass even the strength of trolls. She added that the crystal would be suitable as a core for one of them. All that remained was to decide who would get it. Rowan and Theo said they were ready to give it up to Mora. Mora asked in surprise, "Are they really going to give it to me?" Ethan also decided that this would be the right thing to do. Mora replied that it would definitely pay off. She asked not to be disturbed for a while and began making the core. Ethan laughed, noting that she wouldn't be seen again for a long time now. 3 days later, Yuna's guild was ready to explore the second floor of the dungeon. Yuna remembered that this floor turned out to be more difficult than the ones she had previously completed. She asked everyone to spread out and be ready to cover each other. She reminded that there is only one goal, to survive and return home. Descending the slippery steps, Yuna finally announced that the exit was visible ahead. She added that it is unknown what lies ahead and everyone should be on guard. After passing through the dark tunnel, everyone saw a bright light ahead. No one could understand how such a semblance of paradise could exist in a dungeon. A dense forest stretched out before them, a complete unknown. The squad froze in place, awaiting instructions from the commander. Ethan watched the guild's progress with interest, also wondering where the sky had come from in the dungeon. Rowan replied that this was possible, but only in higher-level dungeons. Ethan decided to turn to Mora for advice and looked at the closed door. She replied that this happens even in ordinary dungeons, and the monsters there are even stronger and more resilient. Mora added that such places are called field dungeons. She explained that in such dungeons there is no boss room. The boss roams around the entire area, but the goal remains the same: kill the boss and clear the dungeon. After this, Mora returned to the room and closed the door behind her, and Ethan decided to go to practice to get better prepared. A few days later, Ethan and Mora came up with a plan and contacted the guild. Yuna read the message and clarified that Darian had not asked to join the guild, but had only warned about the dangers of the dungeon. Rowan said that we need to hurry and dig faster. He noticed that if the wall turned out to be flimsy, they would be the first to die and become undead, like himself. Ethan said that, with the help of the guild, things went much faster. This time he asked for help, and in return offered to teach them magic. Thus, a reliable defensive camp was erected. After reconnaissance, Theo reported discovering apes, red monkeys, and rhinoceros beetles. The beetle was the size of a human head, could fly, and its large horn posed a considerable danger. Ethan said there was little information and advised caution. At this time, Rowan was undergoing training at the guild. After the training, Ethan personally supervised the magic training, stating that a true magician must give as much as he receives. After classes, many stayed in the dungeon overnight to accumulate more mana, and Ethan trained hard, meditated, and worked on accumulating mana. Almost 3 months passed like this. Theo shouted that they needed to run as fast as they could. Huge boulders were already flying out of the forest. At that very moment, they blocked the escape route. And on the other side, many monsters were already approaching the guild. Yuna ordered to split into groups and stand back to back for defense. Theo rushed at the nearest creature, covering the others. But then he received a strong blow to the head. He was thrown against the rock and the monster was already rushing after him, waving its huge paws. But then Yuna blocked his path, hiding behind a shield. She performed a feint and knocked the monster off its feet. Then one of the crossbowmen joined in, helping the commander finish off the creature. Theo admitted that he survived only thanks to her. But the remaining monsters continued to attack the guild squad. The fighters stood back to back and, on command, began to crush the creatures. One of the creatures jumped too close, and Yuna immediately hit it on the head. Theo swung his sword, cutting through bodies and severing limbs. It seemed like this fight would never end. Suddenly, fireballs began to fly, and Theo realized that the monsters were on the offensive more actively than before. He barely dodged the monkey's blow, but immediately responded with his fist. Another creature fell dead. Theo shouted that the red monkey was dead. It should be easier now. But he was very wrong. The white monkey was looming right above him. She turned out to be one of the wandering chieftains. Theo managed to dodge, but some of the fighters were not so lucky. He looked around and realized that he was left alone with this giant. The chieftain let out a threatening roar and turned his head to the side. The necromancer's creation, a stone golem of the fourth circle, came forward to meet the monkey. He arrived just in time. There was no one left to fight. The golem received the order and rushed at the monkey. Theo came to his senses and saw his owner. The monkey froze in place, and the golem was in no hurry to attack first. Rowan warned the owner to be careful. No one knew what to expect from this creature. The creature straightened up to its full height and let out a loud, inviting roar. The roar was so loud that Ethan had to cover his ears. But it wasn't just a roar. The monkey was calling for help. The two-headed bloody wolves appeared, the same wandering leaders as the monkey. Mora managed to surround the wounded with protection by using cards and a healing spell. Yuna couldn't believe she was alive. The stone golem and its team were ready for battle. Several leaders opposed them at once, and they had to be destroyed at any cost. The first wolf rushed at the golem, who had already raised his stone hand to strike. A second later, there was no trace left of the predator's muzzle. Rowan was also ready to cut the creatures into pieces. Ethan raised his staff and hurled a pile of rocks at the approaching monsters. The next moment, he shouted a spell that transformed the stone golem. The golem grew in size and attacked the monkey. One blow was enough to knock the furry creature to the ground. Ethan shouted that there was only enough mana for 20 minutes, but he had to act in time. Then Yuna shouted to look under her feet. There were fragments of a two-headed wolf crawling around. Ethan ordered that the pieces not be allowed to grow back together. Mora then declared that it was time to show the strength of their army. With one movement, she summoned an entire army of enraged skeletons. Now Ethan knew what the power of the moon crystal was capable of. But that wasn't all. As the battle progressed, the skeletons grew armor, turning into skeleton knights. The first of them crashed into the enemy ranks and pierced the wolf with a spear. Now not a single creature could escape the deadly blows of the knightly army. The white monkey behind him lifted a huge boulder above himself and let out a victorious roar. At that moment, a huge golem fist loomed over her. With a sharp movement, the golem squeezed the boulder, and the stone fragments flew towards the leader. The entire team remained under the protection of the stone golem, understanding that interfering now would be mortally dangerous. The two-headed monster opened both its mouths, and bloody breath came out of them. Ethan used his defensive skills to throw everyone out of the danger zone. The fighters were thrown back to a safe distance. The next moment, Ethan summoned the dragon again. He waited for the right moment and ordered Noctis to use his breath. The bloody breath intensified and the dragon began to retreat. Ethan placed his hand on his body and shouted that he would give all his mana to show the boss his full power. A second later, Noctis opened his mouth and cast corruption. Ethan lost his strength and fell to the ground unconscious. Opening his eyes, he saw Mora, Rowan, and Theo nearby. He didn't remember anything and asked what happened. His friends replied that he had used up all his mana and was completely exhausted. He needed rest. Ethan asked how Yuna and her guild were doing. Theo replied that everything was fine and everyone was safe. But there was a problem. Noctis's pride almost caused them to lose. Theo added that after the battle, Yuna's team conducted reconnaissance and discovered a new monster. This is a huge boss with a horn on its forehead and fangs. Ethan was surprised. Is he really bigger than the ones they've already fought? Rowan replied that it was a low-ranking monster, slightly smaller than the white monkey, nicknamed the Weak Giant. He added that it would be difficult to fight him. Magic doesn't work on him. Despite his nickname, the boss is very smart. This may be the most dangerous enemy, and a way to deal with it must be found. Then Noctis appeared and declared that he would kill him himself. He added that no help was needed and asked not to interfere, as last time. Mora quietly noted that such behavior from the dragon could not be ignored. She added that the owner needed to rest and then start taming new creatures. None of the researchers could have imagined that these monsters had a master, or rather, a mistress. People easily dealt with two-headed wolves, and this bored her. She decided it was time to play for big money and spun the roulette wheel. The arrow stopped at one of the sectors. The hostess chuckled. She was actually saving it for dessert. But now we can start the feast with something sweeter. The guild members wasted no time preparing for a new battle. Ethan took the crystal he had mined and examined it in the light. He showed the stone to Yuna and explained that this is what a goblin's heart looks like. It draws mana from the environment and is very useful for summoning golems. He said that they had been looking for a use for him for a long time, but now everything had fallen into place. Yuna took the glass and said that she wanted to discuss some terms of cooperation. She added that the guild wins precisely because Darian's team is fighting nearby. Yuna said that after the last battle, she was finally convinced of the power of the magician Darian. But now, as a leader, she made a decision. Their guilds cannot pass this dungeon. Yuna was sure that without new victims, this would not end well. Ethan looked at her and replied that he understood perfectly well that this was not an easy decision to make. He added that he was ready to terminate the contract, but the guild would benefit from everything they had achieved together. Yuna shook Darian's hand and thanked him for his understanding. Once Ethan had fully recovered, the team descended into the dungeon again. He was extremely surprised to find someone else in the dungeon. Rowan said that they needed to be as quiet as possible so as not to wake the monster. The giant slept peacefully in his gorge, not feeling any danger. He was confident that his army would reliably guard his peace. Noctis stated that they needed to attack right now while the creature was sleeping. Ethan's words about the team only getting in the way left a bad taste in the dragon's mouth. But he did not correct anything and ordered to prepare for battle. The dragon, without waiting for his master's order, was the first to emerge from hiding. His menacing roar instantly awakened the one-horned giant. The monsters immediately formed a wall, protecting the leader. Noctis swung his tail, knocking one of the creatures off its feet. The giant rushed at the dragon, aiming a blow at its head. Noctis was strong, but clumsy, and did not have time to dodge the boss's fist. The dragon grabbed the giant by the hand and shook his head sharply. The boss flew back and fell awkwardly to the ground. Noctis again stated that there was no need to interfere. He could handle it himself. The giant jumped up and immediately attacked the dragon again. The boss broke Noctis's jaw with a powerful blow. After the second blow, the dragon was already lying on the ground. He raised his head and directed his deadly breath at the leader. But this had no effect on the giant. The boss jumped towards the dragon and instantly pinned him to the ground. Rowan shouted that it wouldn't hurt to intervene now and rushed at the giant. Noctis stood up and growled at the boss that such a worthless creature could not defeat him. But the monster did not listen and again knocked down the dragon with a kick. But Noctis thought of only one thing. He was a dragon, a representative of a superior race, and he cannot lose. Then Ethan couldn't take it anymore and reminded him that he was just an imposter. And the giant dealt blow after blow. Ethan shouted at him to cool down. You can't become a real dragon by your own will. The leader approached the fallen Noctis and in the next moment tore his skeleton into pieces. In his head he heard the voice of his master, promising to make him stronger than a real dragon. Ethan replied that he had no intention of walking further alongside someone whose mind was clouded by pride. He added that if Noctis continued to think only about himself, he would never become stronger. The dragon quietly replied that he was ready to change. He begged his master to teach him to be different, to be stronger. Ethan looked at him and said that he had been waiting for these words for a long time. He decided to give the dragon a second chance and used magic to give him new strength. Noctis instantly recovered and once again appeared before the boss, full of strength. Ethan jumped on the dragon and shouted that it was time to finish off the monster. He added that Noctis now has ghost armor, dark energy, and unholy weapons. To become stronger, the dragon needs to learn to use all of this right now. Noctis replied that he would try and rushed at the chieftain. Ethan jumped aside, and the dragon and the monster soared into the air. The master shouted at Noctis to use the Death's Bone Spear. The dragon succeeded, and a huge piece of rock was already flying towards the giant. The Spear of Death found its target and pierced the monster through and through, pinning it to the ground. The earth began to swallow the monster, and soon it disappeared underground entirely. Mora noticed that Noctis now looked like a real dragon. And then the earth trembled where the leader's body had disappeared. Everyone rushed there and saw a glowing hill at the place where the giant had disappeared. The next moment, a sphere with a giant inside rose from the ground. No one could understand what was happening. After all, he had already been killed. Ethan shouted that he didn't like the place and urged everyone to be careful. He added that he felt like someone was watching them nearby. And then a horned creature in the form of a woman appeared before them and slowly clapped its hands. She said she was disappointed with the outcome of the fight and suggested starting over. No one on the team yet knew that she was the owner of these monsters. She asked if Ethan wanted to ask her anything. Although there was no guarantee that she would answer, the stranger added that she had been closely watching the fight and now understood who was in front of her. She said that at first she wanted to kill Ethan, but now she decided to keep him alive. She liked his self-confidence and dedication to the team. And since she's already here, it would be boring to just leave. She snapped her fingers and everything around was illuminated with a bright light. Ethan felt his body fill with a huge amount of mana. After a few minutes, she said that since everyone had come to their senses, the fight could begin. She smiled, adding that she would fight at half strength and Ethan only needed to hold out for 5 minutes. Mora suggested that they were simply being tested, but Ethan replied that there was no choice anyway. He added that if something goes wrong, he will transfer all his mana to Noctis for attack. Rowan and Theo will remain undercover. The stranger said that it was enough to waste time and suggested that they attack first. She instantly rose above the ground, and Noctis decided to immediately strike with his breath. It was the evil breath of death. The stranger's right hand immediately turned into a huge claw and she exclaimed, "Is this all you can do?" She added that it was too boring and dealt the dragon a powerful blow. With one movement, she almost finished off Noctis. She said she might change her mind and just kill Ethan. No one could understand who she was or how to fight her. The stranger seemed to read his thoughts and replied that she was a creature from another world. Ethan gave mana to the dragon and managed to restore it. He ordered Noctis to finish off the giant immediately. Ethan then turned to Mora and said that he needed a magical explosion. The next moment, everything around was illuminated by a bright, scorching light. The explosion destroyed the sphere with the monster inside, and Noctis was able to reach it. And then the giant boss began to come to life. Rowan ran up to the sphere and finally crushed it. Theo rushed to help finish off the creature. The stranger chuckled, noticing that Ethan had spent almost all his strength on some wretched giant. Ethan replied that a creature like her could not have appeared on its own. There had to be a guide. He added that this place was completely different from the others. She landed on the ground and announced that she was leaving them alive. The test had been passed. Thanks to them, she at least managed to have a little fun. The stranger said that she might even reward them with something. She added that she could take Ethan on as an apprentice or servant. But for now it's their turn, and a pleasant bonus awaits them. Before disappearing, she introduced herself as Lucilla, a demonic dragon. Finally, she added that perhaps they would meet again and play with the same pleasure. At home, Ethan couldn't shake the thought that Lucilla might have taken him with her. Mora replied that perhaps that would be the case the next time they met. Ethan said that who knows what other creatures they will meet in the dungeon. Theo said that in any case we need to be prepared for a fight with Lucilla. Ethan replied that he needed to become stronger to fight her on equal terms. Mora said that everyone is ready to follow the master to the end. Ethan replied that they had come a long way and had trusted each other all this time. And then someone rang the doorbell. Ethan walked up to the camera and seeing the girl asked who she was. The stranger replied that she was from the dungeon, worked in the operations department, and her name was Jenna. Mora, Rowan, and Theo were shocked. They had no idea that there was a real company behind all this. The head of the secret organization was furious. How could such powerful monsters appear in a dungeon of this level? 16 people had already died. The assistant replied that there were survivors, and one guy turned out to be especially talented. He tried to kill these creatures. He added that he might send an undercover agent to investigate the deaths. But the manager suggested that we simply contact this promising researcher first. Upon entering the room, Jenna explained that her organization manages the website, delivers ordered goods using the technology of higher beings, and also handles financial transactions. Mora asked what kind of creatures these were, and whether the organization could contact them at any time. Hearing the talking skeleton, Jenna was taken aback at first, but remembered her work and continued. She replied that she didn't know for sure, but it seemed that these creatures were both gods and demons. Ethan suggested getting down to business and explaining the purpose of the visit. Jenna replied that while studying the data on the participants, she discovered that 16 people had already died in the dungeon. She asked if Ethan could tell her more about what was happening and offer help. Ethan became interested and asked what the organization could offer him. He added that he was not interested in money, he already had enough of it. Jenna replied that the organization was willing to sell him mana crystals for information. She added that, unlike the dungeon, they have some rather rare specimens. Mora whispered that with such crystals, they would have even more opportunities. Ethan looked at her and replied that this was not enough. Jenna asked, surprised, if he was really so sure of the value of his information. Ethan replied that he was ready to risk his life and would keep his word. Jenna stood up abruptly, took out her phone and told someone that there was a small problem. She went to the window and talked a little more. A couple of minutes later, Jenna handed Ethan the phone, saying that the director wanted to talk in person. The director offered to buy medicinal herbs, metals, and mana crystals at a low price. Ethan replied that he would agree for a half-price discount. The negotiations with the director were tough, but he remained firm. Once they came to an agreement, Ethan asked for a 3-year contract as well. The director said that Ethan was asking for too much and that one discount would be enough. But Ethan knew a lot and understood the value of both himself and his magical abilities. Ethan replied that otherwise he would find someone who would pay his price for the information. The director agreed to a 3-year contract on the condition that Ethan would work for the government during that time. Ethan categorically rejected such a condition. He explained that he did not want to be limited by government frameworks and act on someone else's orders. The director offered a 2-year contract and freelance work. Ethan asked for clarification on the detailed terms. The director replied that he would send the contract so that he could familiarize himself with all the points. Mora noticed that now they would have a lot of useful things. The director added that there would be one more condition. You would have to pass a certain test. His organization is a government one, and he personally cannot enter into contracts. Other departments might object. And he wouldn't want control over the researchers to pass to others. Ethan wasn't too keen on the proposal, but he asked what needed to be done. The director said that we needed to go through a sealed dungeon that no one had ever managed to overcome. He added that it was in this world, but sealed to prevent monsters from escaping. As Ethan had suspected, these creatures had already entered their world. Ethan looked at his friends and asked if they were ready to take the test together. Mora decided to vouch for everyone. They still needed to go through the dungeon, become stronger, and return to Lucilla. Ethan understood that the monster would not leave them alone, and sooner or later, a new fight would occur. He put the phone to his ear and agreed, but demanded all available information about the sealed dungeon. A few days later, the helicopter landed on the territory of a closed military base. Jenna was assigned to accompany Ethan's team. They approached a group of soldiers, and Jenna introduced the arriving team. The commander looked at Ethan and admitted that he did not believe in the success of this mission. Jenna replied that, although he looked like an ordinary guy, he already had more than one dungeon under his belt. The commander stated that if he retreated, they would not bear responsibility for the consequences. He silently motioned for them to follow him, and Ethan's team headed towards the base, which was full of vehicles and troops. Having reached a certain door, the commander ordered to stop and wait. Soon the door opened, and behind it was another one, and behind that one was the dungeon itself. Then the door swung open, and several goblins crawled out. The commander ordered to immediately block the first door and destroy the monsters before they could escape. But the door wouldn't close. Something was jammed on the hinges. The commander ordered the soldiers to advance and not let a single creature escape. The next order was given and the soldiers opened fire. Following the others, a goblin shaman crawled out with a staff made of skulls, and the entire passage was instantly engulfed in flames. The commander ordered that medics be called to the victims. Ethan summoned Noctis and ordered him to destroy the monsters. The dragon began to mercilessly crush the green creatures. The commander was surprised when, after a few minutes, silence reigned all around. Ethan calmly announced that he was ready to enter the dungeon. It took only 30 hours to complete the task. Ethan's team remained safe and sound. After the test, Ethan signed the contract and shared all the information he knew about the dungeons, the undead, and also told about Lucilla. The director still didn't understand how to solve this problem. He decided to join forces and ordered his assistant to secretly send the obtained data to other countries to avoid panic and leaks. He also gave Jenna a note with instructions on who to deliver it to. Mora opened the closed section of the site and asked the owner what was available for purchase. Ethan replied that even with the discount, the prices were still steep. But Mora would like to buy almost everything. A lot of useful things can be made from such material. Ethan and his team recently moved again, and now Mora has a full-fledged office on the 2nd floor. The bedrooms and living room are located on the 1st floor, and the gym is on the 3rd. The house also had passages to the dungeon, so Rowan painted magic circles on the walls in case monsters got in. Jenna stopped by again and complimented them on their choice of a beautiful house. Ethan asked with displeasure why she hadn't warned him about the visit. Jenna reminded them that today was their last day off. Tomorrow the house would once again become a portal to the dungeon. She added that she already knew which dungeon Ethan would end up in. She said that 35 other researchers would go there with him. Together with them, he will explore the Cave of Doubts. But Ethan refused to go on a joint hike. He explained that he would not be able to protect such a large crowd. Discords were possible and was only prepared to gather information about the dungeon. Jenna handed over a flash drive with information about general and additional tasks. Points are awarded for completing them. After descending into the dungeon, Ethan said that the dungeons now had names and they needed to enter the Cave of Doubt. Rowan noticed that it was very dark in here and that the master could practice using the darkness. He suggested that Ethan walk a little further than usual and watch the air movement. Rowan added that magic could compensate for missing senses. Ethan concentrated and felt everything the mana touched. And then Mora exclaimed that the people from the company had cheated them. She showed the owner her phone. The points she had collected could be exchanged for a day of freedom, but there was a limit of only 30 participants. Mora panicked. If they had known about this earlier, they would have scored more points. When they tried to calm her down, she said that they needed to buy something for Noctis. She explained that his bones were held together by mana, but there was no organ capable of closing the circuit that controlled it. Simply put, Noctis doesn't have a dragon heart. To become a real dragon, you need a core. But there's a downside. His body is now merely a vessel for his soul. If the body dies, the soul will survive, but if the core is destroyed, Noctis will perish. The dragon became angry and replied that he didn't care. He was and would remain an imposter. Ethan noticed that Noctis had changed a lot after meeting and fighting Lucilla. Theo reported that during the conversation he looked around and noticed signs of an ambush. It seemed that the monsters began to act consciously. Their tactics resembled guerrilla warfare against the researchers. Ethan took note of this and suggested moving on. After passing through the tunnel, the team reached the research camp that Jenna had mentioned. Ethan saw the fighters fixing something and immediately realized who was in charge here. It was Yoon Sungjae, the guild leader appointed by the head office. The second was Park Dong-hyun, the leader of the Kanjin Guild. Then Choi Ir-han, the head of the Taemo Guild, came up and suggested stopping the fight, followed by Han Jae-won, the head of the Hemosu Guild, carrying the wounded man. Ir-kan noticed how one of the girls mistakenly injured a tamed monster, mistaking it for an enemy. It was So Umbi, the leader of the Survivors Guild, who declared that she could attack at any moment. At that moment, the earth shook and the guild members grabbed their weapons in alarm. Javon shouted for someone to check the situation immediately. After several jumps, the girl found herself on the roof of the tallest building. Her name was Kim Najin, the deputy and second in rank in the Himasu Guild. She looked into the distance and was horrified. She screamed, calling for immediate preparation for an attack. A whole army of skeletons was approaching the camp. The monsters were on the campsite in seconds, and Jaewon struck the closest one. And then he saw that the sword was melting from contact with the creature. Javen shouted that the monsters could not be killed with weapons, they had to be burned. Several fighters grabbed the cylinders and threw them into the crowd of creatures. Several powerful explosions thundered immediately. Several roofs of buildings were engulfed in flames due to the intense fire. Burning debris rained down, and the researchers tried to avoid it. At that moment, a horned creature appeared in the sky, enveloping everything in icy fog. Dong-hyun shouted that Noe had shielded them from the flames. Najin ordered not to look back and continue attacking the monsters. The fighters immediately brought another cylinder, preparing for a new attack. Ir-kan ordered to try to gather all the creatures in one place. But the skeletons scattered. The team tried to block their path. Several cylinders flew into the air, and the entire camp was engulfed in flames. And then everyone saw riders riding green creatures emerge from the cave. Apparently, the monsters wanted to deprive the researchers of their weapons with their first blow. Bombi ordered several fighters to give mana to Noe. A minute later, ice spears were thrown at the monsters. Sungjae rushed at the creatures with his bare hands, shouting that they would not give up so easily. The riders attacked the tamed skeleton and pierced it with several spears. Someone shouted that they couldn't stand without weapons. They would all die. The next moment, a dragon appeared in the sky and its rider shouted to protect the wounded man and leave the fight to him. Ethan's team realized it was their turn and rushed to attack. The fighters exclaimed, "Is this really the same necromancer, Darien?" Noctis circled above the camp, trying to extinguish the flames. The monster riders looked at each other and decided to retreat. The army of monsters fled on their green creatures. A few minutes later, the researchers rejoiced to learn that everyone had survived. After a short respite, they decided to demolish the burnt buildings and rebuild the camp. Yunbi tried to buy a recovery elixir for the wounded, but the system reported that the service was unavailable. There were still monsters nearby. But people were perplexed. Everything around was clean. Ethan said they couldn't go back. There were probably monsters among them. One of the guild leaders asked how to distinguish a monster from a real person, and Ethan admitted that he didn't know yet. Javon suggested trying to send people home in groups. If the group can't be sent, it means there's a monster among them. That's how you can identify it. Dongyun countered that in the end, only monsters and a handful of humans would remain, and it was unlikely that anyone would agree to that. He suggested leaving at least a few proven fighters for protection. The guild leaders gathered and began to think about the best way to solve the problem. Irhan suggested drawing lots or playing rock, paper, scissors. Rowan said that if they continued to treat this like a game, they would all be dead tomorrow. He added that they lack composure, observation, and resilience. Wonby asked if he was suggesting they just go home, and Rowan confirmed it. He looked at her and added that they would figure it out themselves. Rowan noted that his team would survive without losses. They were already undead. Sungjae asked Darien if they really didn't need the guild's help. Ethan replied that there was no choice, either deal with the situation or die. Rowan later apologized for his arbitrary decision. He added that sometimes it is better to act spontaneously than to waste time on strategy. Mora said she agreed with Rowan. Not all guild leaders would understand the plan correctly, and disagreements were possible. Ethan replied that next time it would be worth consulting with him. He came out and ordered everyone to prepare for the attack. To begin with, they decided to blow up the area so that the main monster would spend energy on restoring the dungeon. At that moment, the ground shook under our feet again. When a stone golem began to rise from the ground, the remaining fighters assumed that Darien had summoned it. Ethan shouted that this was not his doing. Perhaps the monster itself served as a refuge for these creatures. The golem slammed his stone fist into the ground and the fighters scattered. Then, from the depths of the stone, riders on green lizards appeared again. Theo took out the traps and pressed the buttons. The traps were triggered, and one of the leaders shouted that the monsters needed to be dealt with as quickly as possible. Ethan jumped on Noctis and shouted at the creatures that their end was near. The dragon exhaled furiously, and the monsters' bodies began to melt. But the next moment, these bloody masses rushed at the dragon. Ethan couldn't believe that these monsters were even capable of such a thing. They thought and acted quite rationally, like people. This formless mass turned out to be a double, an incomplete copy of the ruler of the Cave of Doubts. Ethan, looking at the mass flying towards him, realized that he would have to fight this creature. Noctis released a powerful blast of breath towards the bloody mass. Having broken the bloody liquid into separate fragments, Ethan realized that there was no time to waste. He had to stop them from growing back together. Ethan ordered Rowan and Theo to destroy the remains of the monster immediately. They threw spears, but it was all in vain. The mass regained its shape. She moved forward, and Rowan and Theo were forced to retreat. By this time, the guild leaders had already managed to finish off the stone golem. Mora took out her staff and cast a paralyzing spell on the bloody mass. The soldiers heard an explosion and saw the pile of debris shatter into pieces. One of the fragments fell right in front of Sungjae and continued moving. Mora shouted at him to destroy this fragment immediately. It was not easy. The creature was trying to reunite into a single whole. The guild leaders joined forces to try to finish off these fragments together. One of the fragments took the form of a bull and hissed that it would destroy these pathetic humans. Donghyun ran too close and the mass swallowed him up. He couldn't move and began to sink into the bloody mass. Ethan threw a bone spear, trying to free Donghyun. The creature retreated, but the victim remained unconscious. Ethan ordered that the wounded be collected and taken to shelter immediately. The bloody monster screamed that it was now Ethan's turn to die. Ethan was left alone with the monsters, and they surrounded him. Ethan cast a spell and summoned the skeleton knights. At his command, the tamed undead rushed to fight the creatures. Theo, Rowan, and Mora also rushed to help. Mora raised her staff and pointed it at one of the creatures. The bloody creature was again blown to pieces, but after a few seconds it was intact again. It was like a vicious circle, and there was no end in sight to the fight. This bloody creature turned out to be stronger than the summoned skeletons. Ethan decided to resort to the last possible method. The fragments began to become smaller and lose strength. Ethan still had some mana left. It was a kind of trap that drained the enemy's mana. The last surviving fragment was still trying to resist. He stated that even if his dungeon was destroyed, the monster's mana would still be released. Ethan extended his hand, threw the spear, and replied that it would not happen. He added that the tip of the spear contained part of his mana, capable of destroying the creature. Ethan shouted at Noctis to finish off the blood creature and the remaining doppelgangers. The dragon soared into the sky and again unleashed its ferocious breath on the enemy. The next moment, the bloody monster changed its appearance, shouting that if it weren't for them, it would have become perfect. It didn't have time to finish speaking. It burned in the flames of Noctis's breath, and then the creature's doubles began to melt before our eyes, losing their strength. Ethan sat on the ground, his mana almost gone. Rowan came up and said that they owed their success to the owner. At home, Ethan couldn't eat or sleep, realizing how close he was to death. Theo entered the room and said that he had an unusual request for the owner. He would like to leave the house and meet his friends. Ethan turned to Mora for help, and together they began to create a face for Theo to take him out onto the streets. Mora shook her head thoughtfully and said that it was not within her power for now. Ethan chuckled and offered to give Theo the skill to sample food and alcohol at the party. When everything was ready, Ethan saw Theo off and told him to return before midnight. Meanwhile, Mora herself proposed setting up mass production of doubles. Theo returned cheerful and quite tipsy, and Ethan noticed that since he hardly left the house, he had more than enough free time. And then a curious idea came to him. Doubles can be used on the street until a mission begins and a real fight is needed. Ethan sat down at the computer and saw a new feature on the website, the mercenary system. Rowan noticed that things seemed to be going poorly in the dungeons. Ethan was puzzled as to why such a feature was needed at all. Mora suggested that the reason was that mana from the dungeons was leaking into their world. Due to the increasing number of explorers, the mana density in the dungeons increases, and within a year it can become equal both inside and outside. Ethan replied that for them personally, it wasn't that bad, but there was a danger that in the near future battles would begin in their world. Ethan remembered Lucilla, but he was no longer so sure that she would be the final boss. Mora said that it would take time to get stronger and do something before the mana density evened out. Ethan said that it would be worth trying to work as a mercenary first. When Mora suggested that under such a system, strong players would want to get rid of the weak, Ethan just laughed. He stated that they themselves would become wolves in sheep's clothing and would not give the weak any slack. After registering as a mercenary, Ethan saw that many foreigners wanted to join his squad. Mora said there would be no language barrier, the magic of translation could be applied. She scribbled something and added that she would immediately begin mastering this skill. Ethan and Rowan began looking for more profitable orders for those who urgently needed help. Ethan realized that this way he could not only make money, but also gain many allies. The director carefully studied the researchers' reviews of the necromancer who had arrived to help. Some even believed that he had made a deal with the devil himself. He decided to meet this magician as soon as possible and lure him to his side before he became too powerful. The director went out into the hall to give orders, but there was no one there. Then he noticed an open door and heard sounds coming from there. The next moment, someone entered and said that they had finally met. The director realized that he was alone and asked in panic who was in front of him. And then someone said that the time had come. The disasters that they so wanted to avoid have already begun. The military threw all its efforts into preventing the monsters from entering the real world. Lucilla watched the proceedings, anticipating the approaching danger with obvious pleasure. Yunbi lay with her face buried in the blanket and kept repeating one thing: she didn't want to die. Too many people died in the dungeon, and there was only a month left to clean it up. She flinched at the sound of an incoming message, but still picked up her phone to look. The message stated that the dungeon had been cleared thanks to mercenaries. Yunbi peered intently towards the door, behind which a dungeon was immediately revealed. The first thing she saw was Darien and his dragon. She came closer and heard the researchers admire the necromancer's strength and skill. She thanked Darien for responding to the request and helping with the cleanup. Ethan didn't joke around and said he didn't do it for nothing. He reminded her that her request stated that the guild would do everything possible to save them. Yunbi didn't argue and asked how she could help Darien. Ethan handed her the contract and told her to sign it. She signed the document without even reading it. Ethan noted that signing the papers without looking was stupid. Yunbi replied that the essence of the contract was clear. Her soul now belonged to him. She looked at Darien and asked if she could give him more strength so he could do more for her. Ethan replied that he takes good care of those dear to him and is able to give them strength. At home, she realized that only she herself could bring more benefit. Yunbi has a talent for curse magic, and she's also a leader. The squad will still follow her. Then Rowan and Theo returned and were tasked with conducting the training. They added that the researchers do an excellent job and respond quickly to requests. Ethan knew that the cleared dungeon wouldn't close as long as there were people there, an excellent place to restore mana and train. He gave Yunbi books on necromancy so that she could develop her abilities. Then Rowan came up and said that it was time to finish with the lower levels of the dungeons and move on. Mora showed options for where to go next. Ethan did some calculations and said that they needed mages of at least the third circle, at least 5. Mora stated that the latest offer promised not only a good reward, but also compensation for any damages. The team gathered and decided to go to the chosen dungeon. Ethan asked the name of the guild that had asked for help. Mora replied that the Golden Black Hole Guild is one of the top 10 in the United States. There was still time before the sortie, and the team decided to spend it on training. The monsters he encountered were not very diverse, and Ethan dealt with them easily. But this training was special. Ethan learned to absorb and pacify the bloody mass. Now he could summon her at will and gave her the name Rune. And so the day came for Ethan's team to meet the Golden Black Hole Guild. After passing through a narrow gorge, they were suddenly blinded by a bright light. Ethan introduced himself as Darien and asked to turn off the lights, but was told it was for safety. A minute later, Ethan saw the guild leader and his men. The president introduced himself as Derek Hartman and claimed to be the one who hired him. He added that he considers himself the patron saint of all magicians. Ethan realized that this was the same man who sent him books and chain mail. It was thanks to Hartman that he survived. The president smiled and introduced him to his aide, Tyler. Ethan was wearing a mask and had no intention of revealing his real face yet. Hartman said that although they were strangers, he hoped to find common ground with him. He invited everyone to the table to drink tea. Ethan removed his mask, and the president remarked that there must have been reasons for that. When the others arrived, Hartman offered to begin negotiations. He said that his guild was currently busy thoroughly clearing the dungeons. According to their calculations, the work should not take more than a month. Rowan liked these conditions. He was tired of the constant squabbles. Having settled some issues, Hartman said that he was glad to see such a powerful necromancer in their ranks. He was sure that Darian would not accept the offer to join the guild anyway, and therefore kept silent about it. The president said he knew about the tamed dragon, but hoped his help would not be needed. Later, Hartman led Ethan's team to the location where the cleanup was to begin. Ethan tasked Theo with gathering as much information as possible about the place. He added that he does not rule out a new meeting with Lucilla. Ethan turned to Hartman and said that he had encountered dungeons of this type before. Many powerful monsters could live there. Tyler told the director that he hoped for a fight without major casualties. Ethan added that he encountered a certain creature in one of the dungeons. Her name is Lucilla, and she is considered a demonic dragon that foretells trouble. What makes her different is that she survives at the expense of other bosses. Ethan revealed that Lucilla had no intention of killing him, but was simply testing him in battle. He realized that in a 5-minute fight, she had engaged 3 bosses at once. She eventually acknowledged his strength and noticed that he was dead. Hartman asked how many men Darian needed to defeat Lucilla, but Ethan refused to specify. The president handed him a bracelet, explaining that it was a magical means of communication. He wished Darian's team good luck and expressed hope for success. The day before, Theo suddenly announced that they needed transportation. He explained that it took too much time to move around the dungeon on foot. Mora added that you can summon a dragon and ride it. Ethan replied that it would take too much mana. He proposed a different form of transport, which was unanimously approved. Rowan pressed the gas pedal and the car sped across the sandy off-road. The president and his assistant stared at them in surprise. They certainly didn't expect this in the dungeon. Derek gave the order and the guild began to build a fortified defensive camp. Ethan said that he estimated they would get there in about 30 minutes. After examining the area, the team did not find a single monster. Ethan reported the situation and said that they were on their way back. The car turned sharply and headed towards the camp. Ethan looked around and asked Rowan if they were heading back the right way. Soon the car stopped and everyone got out to look around. Mora said she had 2 pieces of news, good and bad. Ethan decided to listen to the bad part first. It still needed to be resolved somehow. Mora said that they were stuck in the sand and magic alone wouldn't be enough. She added that after sending the mana around, she noticed that it got stuck in one place. Mana is difficult to control and moves around on its own. Mora said it was no coincidence and the same thing could happen to them. She explained that the minimum circle for teleportation was the 5th, for a group it was the 7th, and for long distances it was the 8th, which meant they were blocked by an 8th circle being. The good news is that the creature was also blocked along with them. Ethan suggested that since the creature wasn't killing them, maybe it could get them out. At that moment, the camp was attacked by sand creatures. Despite their numbers, the guild managed to repel the attack. The president ordered that the wounded be dealt with and the defenses be restored. The next moment, the ghost of the girl appeared, noticing that they were very smart. She looked at Tyler and added that she liked the way he thought. The girl said that they only had an hour to rest, and then the fight would resume. She asked what they'd choose, quality or quantity. Derek asked if it was possible to choose both options at once. The girl said that this was the 3rd option, and that was how it would be. She explained that the next opponents will be both stronger and more numerous. Remembering the passing time, the girl disappeared. The president ordered immediate preparations for the next battle. He thought she was testing them and perhaps planning to use them in the future. When everything was ready, the president noticed that with the appearance of the dungeons, strange creatures also began to appear. He reminded everyone what Darian had told them about Lucilla. It is quite possible that this girl is also one of the local species of dragons. She is checking them out and is unlikely to attack herself, but it is still worth being prepared for anything. Derek said the fight would be tough and it was unknown how many people would die. He added that no one would be forgotten, and asked that he too be remembered if he died. The battle began at the appointed hour. The monsters turned out to be much larger and stronger than before. But thanks to excellent preparation, the guild achieved victory with almost no losses. The girl appeared again and asked what to enhance this time, quality, quantity, or emotions. Derek asked if they could strengthen the defense instead, and the girl replied that the next battle was in 2 hours. Although this battle lasted longer than the previous ones, the guild won again. Before the next 3 fights, Derek shouted out different things. It seemed he had already figured out the rules of the game. At the next break, the president said they had already asked for additional time off, but their options were running out. After the 9th fight, the rules changed, and the girl began to decide for herself. During another battle, Derek noticed that the monsters had improved their equipment and become smarter. The girl clapped her hands, saying that in honor of the 20th battle, she would again increase the rest time. But the president suddenly announced that he wanted to reduce the size of the detachment. The girl looked at him in surprise, and he explained that he wanted to send half of the fighters home. She agreed to spare half and suggested that they choose who would remain. After giving him time to think, the girl said that the next fight would take place in 21 days and disappeared. Without looking at his assistant, Derek said he was going home. He added that one of them must survive to rule the guild. The president stated that the entire country is counting on the Golden Black Hole Guild, and they cannot be let down. The team decided who would leave and who would stay, taking into account their role in the battle and the presence of small children at home. Finally, the choice was made, and Derek promised to take care of everything. The remaining 60 fighters only had to gather their courage and prepare for the next battle. The president ordered everyone to undergo treatment and devote time to light training. In the final hour, Derek delivered a farewell speech, urging the fighters to remain hopeful and believe in themselves and in victory. Soon the monsters appeared, and the president ordered preparations to repel the attack. The guild threw all its forces into the battle to achieve victory, but in the first minutes of the battle, it was not possible to destroy a single enemy. The monsters proved invulnerable and attacked the squad of survivors again. There were many more of them. The forces were unequal. Derek donned his gas mask and rushed into the thick of the battle. He shouted that we must resist as long as possible. With a heavy heart, the president watched as his soldiers died and the ranks of the unit thinned. He heard the last cries of the dying, begging for care for their loved ones. Derek shouted to the remaining people that they had to survive at any cost and destroy the monsters. Now, only a small group remained, surrounded on all sides by monsters. At that moment, a girl appeared, noticing that the commander had not made the best decision. By saving many by sending them home, he thereby signed the death warrant for those who remained. The girl said that now all she could do was watch them die and disappeared. Derek realized his irreparable mistake and ordered to prepare for battle. But the battle was unequal. There were too many powerful monsters, and the president lost fighters time after time. Suddenly, Derek heard a female voice promising victory if he accepted her power and became a monster. Deciding he had no choice, he raised his hand. Suddenly, Darian appeared, grabbed him by the hand, and said that if he became a monster, there would be no turning back. Ethan tried to help the president with magic. Derek asked if Darian had heard what he had been offered. Ethan replied that he was a little late, but noticed that the mind processing had already begun. The president said that perhaps with this force they could cope, but they needed to become stronger. Ethan replied that strength alone was not enough, something else was needed. Derek admitted that he seemed to have lost his head and lost too many people. Suddenly, one of the fighters hit the commander with all his strength. He said that one must answer for one's actions. The next moment, the enraged fighters attacked the president with their fists. One of them said that he wanted to follow a man, not a monster. Ethan replied that there was no point in chasing the monster and ordered the team to destroy the enemy. A few minutes later, Rowan shouted that the enemy was finished. And then the girl appeared again. She angrily told Ethan that everything ended well, thanks to him. She added that she would not be able to defeat him and asked which opponent he would choose this time. Ethan snapped back that there were none. The girl said that this was not an answer and that he would soon say goodbye to life. Ethan replied that he had no intention of dying. He still had a lot of unfinished business. She added that she could not harm him, much less kill him. The girl released her claws, screaming that no one dared to talk down to her. Ethan realized his power, which meant that the source of its power was also somewhere in the dungeon. He said that she had spent too much energy on her soldiers and could not replenish it herself. Ethan added that he had revealed her secret. She did not have enough strength for another attack. The first reason is that he became stronger after overcoming the barrier. Secondly, he is a necromancer, capable of controlling his own army of undead. But she made a mistake by dividing her soul and power among the monsters of her army. The task of the necromancer is to subjugate the soul and give it a physical shell. A necromancer always faces a choice, to subjugate a soul or to destroy it. And as a fifth circle mage, Ethan is able to turn these souls into a powerful explosion. So, having destroyed her soldiers, he weakened her as well. It is unlikely that she will recover quickly. The girl screamed that this was not their last meeting and that she would definitely kill him, and then disappeared. The final battle ended, and the surviving fighters were able to leave the dungeon. An infirmary was set up in the dungeon so that the wounded could recover more quickly and replenish their mana. Ethan stayed behind to keep an eye on the situation. At that moment, Derek walked in and noticed that Ethan had an excellent appetite. Ethan asked how he was feeling, and the president replied that doctors said it would be a long recovery. He added that the sand dungeon had disappeared and it was unlikely that it would be possible to return there. Ethan replied that then they could agree on another task. Derek asked if Darian wanted to stay in the United States. It would be an honor for them to accept him into their guild. Ethan once again declined, adding that he was thinking about starting his own guild. The president said he understood the decision and that they could cooperate in any case. Ethan replied that he would return to Korea first. Derek smiled and thanked Darian for doing everything he could to ensure that the Golden Black Hole Guild survived. He added that he would definitely repay for the help. Ethan replied that he was counting on additional compensation. He had done more than he had agreed to. Left alone, Ethan heard Rowan's words. Without the master, the guild would not have survived. Theo added that we need to try to become stronger. Ethan remembered the girl and suggested that she might be akin to the Legion. He explained that the Legion was a top-class monster that was almost impossible to kill. In other words, the Legion is a phantom that controls other monsters. There are many such ghosts, but only this one is capable of controlling his puppets. But she is not undead. She has a physical body. In any case, Ethan had no desire to meet her again. Then Noctis appeared and remarked that it would be a good idea to absorb her soul for power. Ethan replied that the idea was great. The stronger the dragon, the better for everyone. He added that while they were in America, it was worth gathering as many allies as possible. When Ethan felt better, he went to Derek's gym, who allowed him to train there. He was already on the 5th lap, but still felt that he was far from what he wanted. Ethan already knew how to operate with coordinates instead of simple points, which indicated that he was developing correctly. He also managed to teach Noctis how to use coordinates, making his breathing even more accurate. Lucilla looked at the girl and noticed that she looked like a small insect. The girl screamed, "Why did you leave this guy alive and let them go?" She added that she would not leave it like that. Lucilla smiled, replied that she too was not always free to do what she wanted, and left. She added that this girl is still far from being a real demon, even though she considers herself one. Lucilla noticed that she was alive only because of her. The girl screamed that the time would come and she would kill both of them, Lucilla and that guy. Ethan walked out into the streets of Washington and noticed that it was quite nice here. The president noted that everything here is new for him. Ethan said that as a necromancer he sees much more. If they rose above the city, Derek would understand what he was talking about. An hour later they were sitting in a helicopter. Ethan used the Deadeye spell. The president looked at the city in horror and froze. Ethan said that now Derek can see what happens to the dead. These were the souls of people who did not find peace after death. The president realized that all of this existed thanks to mana. Ethan added that these are not just souls. They are capable of evolving. They are able to absorb other people's souls. This is the law of survival of the undead. Derek grabbed his head, calling it very bad news. But Ethan reassured him, saying there was a way to stop it. Meanwhile, the U.S. president was busy in his office at the White House. After listening to his assistant, the president declared that ghost attacks on city residents were completely absurd. Faced with persistent arguments, he stated that he was essentially being asked to purchase crosses, silver bullets, and holy water. And then the walls of the office began to shake, causing panic among those present. The ghosts poured in and filled the entire room. The president was ordered to evacuate immediately. The next moment, a red substance blocked the path, and the guards opened fire. One of the employees noted that this is precisely why the president should have been keeping a closer eye on what was happening in the country. The president shouted out what it all meant. The commander-in-chief explained that it was all a setup. But in reality, something similar could happen in the country within a year. The president noticed the strangers and asked who they were. He was informed that one of them was Derek Hartman, the head of the Golden Black Hole Guild, and it was he who organized this performance. And the second one, in the mask, is the best necromancer. The commander-in-chief stated that he had already managed to convince everyone except the president himself. Ethan added that if the president doesn't want to see the kingdom of the dead here, permission to act is needed. He added that before arriving here, they had already verified their suspicions in a small town. There, the presence of souls of the dead in the city itself was confirmed. The operation began with the necromancer releasing a dragon into the sky. The necromancer constantly needs mana, and he found a way to replenish it. He took mana from the undead for himself, and then transferred it to Noctis for further accumulation. While receiving mana, Ethan constantly monitored the dragon's condition. And the stronger Noctis became, the stronger the necromancer himself became. To create the dragon heart, Ethan asked Derek to obtain a suitable crystal. Then the president arrived and witnessed the completion of the ceremony. Ethan asked why he brought the priest and the nun. The priest introduced himself as Father Augustine. He needed to make sure that the necromancer's actions would not harm the city. Father Augustine added that he was now convinced that the necromancer was truly capable of driving out evil spirits. He asked him what he planned to do next. Ethan replied that he wanted to rid the big city of danger. The priest wished her good luck and left with the nun. The president said he was confident of the success of future rituals. Derek turned to the necromancer and reported that the required crystal had been obtained. It turned out to be a crystal of hope, also known as a lucky diamond. In the car, Sister Cordelia said that this guy needs to be gotten rid of before he gets any stronger. Father Augustine replied that he completely agreed, but they still had time. Before acting, they decided to observe the necromancer some more. The president entered Ethan's room and asked what he was doing. Ethan replied that he wanted to create undead creatures that could regenerate mana, fight for long periods of time, and wield various weapons. Derek asked how difficult it was. Ethan replied that the process was long, and he had not yet figured out how to instill the necessary skills in the undead. The president thought for a moment and suggested getting involved in robotics. He suggested that these processes are very similar. Subsequently, 2 more rituals were performed, and over 1,000 undead were used to accumulate mana for Noctis. Las Vegas was chosen as one of the cities for the ritual. There were a lot of events going on there at the time, and the ritual was disguised as one of them without causing panic. People were delighted by the spectacle, not even suspecting what was really happening. The residents weren't even afraid of the dragon looming over the city. Everyone decided that such a show robot must have cost a fortune. Ethan himself was dressed up as a magician and did not arouse any suspicion or fear. But what the residents liked most was that they could take part in the exorcism festival themselves. They were given all kinds of weapons that looked like hunting rifles. Ethan had the situation under control and was happy to test the weapon in real conditions. Once the city was cleared, Ethan decided it was time to end this circus. He shouted to the crowd that they were all just fools helping his dragon feed on the energy of the dead. And now they say they are all useless and must die. But today he is merciful and will turn a blind eye to it. Ethan jokingly added that they wouldn't get off so easy next time. With these words, the magician flew away on the dragon and the performance ended. Ethan was about to leave the city, but he knew it wouldn't be that easy. Among the crowd, he noticed knights with crosses and sacred symbols. They shouted that they would not let this vile creature escape unpunished. The president recognized them as knights of the Catholic Church, even though they confirmed their full support for the event. He immediately found the priest and declared the agreement violated, but Father Augustine replied that he did not understand what he was talking about. The priest added that he had warned everyone, but apparently not everyone decided to listen. Derek immediately informed Ethan that helicopters and tanks were approaching them. Then a soldier came up from behind and said that there was nothing more to worry about. He immediately transmitted over the radio that they knew the traitor and ordered that the necromancer not be touched. The surprised president asked whether the search for the traitor had been deliberately delayed, and the officer confirmed that it had. Derek immediately contacted Ethan and informed him that he was free to leave the city, but Ethan suddenly replied that he was not going to leave and wanted to change the script. Ethan flew up to the Catholic squad and declared that he would be extremely outraged if they did just that, but the knight shouted that today was this magician's last day. Ethan exclaimed that people, being imperfect, always strive to become stronger. In essence, they simply hide behind the name of God, imagining that he is protecting them. He added that if they are sure that they are acting according to the will of the Almighty, then God himself is pushing them to evil deeds. A deathly silence reigned among the Catholic ranks. The next moment, the knight's weapons fell to the ground. Ethan didn't expect his words to have such an impact on the believers. One of the knights apologized. They only wanted to follow God's will, but they were wrong. He added that he does not want people to die in this clash. Ethan replied that even though he was considered an enemy, he was leaving this city. The residents were delighted with such an ending, and with shouts saw off the magician, who flew away into the distance on a dragon. Having found a safe place, Ethan admitted that he had not expected such an outcome, and so many problems. He looked at the dragon's stats and wondered why it still obeyed him, since Noctis's stats were already far superior to his own. Noctis replied that it was most likely a matter of the oath. Ethan said that although it will always remain a fake, he will try to make it stronger and better than the original. The dragon replied that he was ready to share this power with his master. Mora added that the owner, thanks to the oath he took, has complete power over the dragon. Ethan replied that it meant that by working together, everyone could become stronger. A month later, the second stage of the cleanup began, which was also completed successfully. And Mora, Rowan, and Theo received a lot of dark mana, and Ethan was able to raise his level even higher. After successfully completing the third stage, Ethan informed the president that it was time for them to return. Derek wished him luck, adding that he would always be glad to meet again. Ethan was extremely surprised to find Jenna at the airport. Then 2 unfamiliar guys approached her and she asked who they were. The red-haired guy laughed and replied that they already knew each other. Jenna looked closely and recognized Rowan. Looking at the second photo, she realized it was Theo. Rowan said they settled in well in the US and now look exactly like this. A minute later, Jenna handed Ethan a letter saying it was from the principal. Inside was a talisman with a certain power. At home, Ethan went about his usual business and then decided to find out about the talisman he had been given. At first he thought it was just an element of Asian culture, but it turned out to be a little more complicated. And then Ethan felt such power in the talisman that he absolutely had to learn to control it. Rowan entered the room and said that they had guests. The director himself sent Ethan the talisman. Ethan was surprised. He had imagined a much older director. He asked if the director didn't know how dangerous magicians were, since he came in person. He replied that he himself had fought the undead. They really were crazy. Ethan asked if magic already existed on Earth. The director replied that yes, although only a little, the magicians had already learned to use it. Ethan asked him to tell him everything he knew on this matter. And then Ethan felt that he couldn't move. Was the director really able to control his body? The director said that many magicians wanted to kill him, but he only wanted to teach the new generation. He then stood up, adding that today would be a truly memorable day for Ethan. The director came to the window and said that Ethan had to follow all his instructions for 10 days. And if he succeeds, he will receive a large reward. Ethan had no choice but to accept this condition. As he left, the director added that they would communicate via the amulet, as the phone might not work here. It remained a mystery to Ethan how the director managed to master magic of such a level. The skeletons said that they needed to prepare well. The director's tasks would certainly be difficult. Ethan tried to figure out what it was: paralysis, some kind of pressure, or maybe time stopping. Maura said it was scary either way. The next day, Jenna came and reported that the director had told her that each of the 5 trucks weighed 10 tons. She then handed over 3 books, adding that these were also from the director. These were books for modern magicians, the Book of the Dead and the Book of Talismans. A couple of days later, Ethan received an assignment and turned to the president for help. Derek managed to get hold of 1.5 tons of silver and 18 tons of iron. Ethan summoned the golems and ordered them to carry the cargo inside. A little later, he came in to check how the work was progressing. Work began with creating reliable protection. The soldiers provided by the government were completely subordinate to Ethan, and their abilities were constantly growing. The basement soon became a huge government-funded warehouse for bombs and missiles. Ethan took on the development of new weapons, Maura drew the sketches, and America brought them to life. And spell cards were now being produced in huge quantities. In exchange for the cards he made, Ethan received crystals from America. Soon information arrived about the completion of this task. Ethan understood that the world was preparing for something truly global. Changes also affected the dungeons. Explorers could no longer enter them. No new tasks appeared, but this did not affect the player's skills and strengths in any way. One manager didn't want to go to work on the first day of the new year. It was already 9 in the morning, and it was strange to see such darkness outside. It was also strange that the road suddenly became stuck in a traffic jam. And the next moment, huge monsters attacked the road. Then followed 4 days of life turning into a living hell. These days completely changed humanity. The director called Ethan and ordered him to go to Seoul immediately to destroy all the monsters he encountered. Ethan asked how much time he had and heard, until tomorrow noon. Ethan found the task a little strange, but remained silent. He gathered the team and announced that it was time to move out. By that time, the monsters had already flooded the city, mercilessly killing the inhabitants. One woman, not understanding what was happening, screamed that they were just living an ordinary life. Nobody wanted to die, but there was nowhere to turn for help. One of the creatures overturned the scooter and was already advancing on her. But the next second, a figure in armor appeared nearby. The stranger helped the couple to their feet and then stepped towards the monster. When the smoke cleared, the soldiers who arrived saw the couple and realized that they were alive. Outside Seoul, there was a secret bunker where the government was hiding. South Korean President Lee Tae-ho entered the room and inquired about the situation. Defense Minister Park Se-yeon-ho approached and reported that the military was trying to clear the city. He added that the causes are still unclear, and a high mortality rate is expected throughout the country. Choi Min-soo, the youngest son of the CEO of Kaido Group, approached them and asked what the president intended to do. His father approached him and asked him not to interfere in the management's conversation. And suddenly Mansu dealt his father a strong blow, from which he died on the spot. He exclaimed that he was glad. The old man would no longer bother him. Someone shouted how dare he kill his own father. Mansu grabbed the screamer by the throat and warned that he would be the next to die if he did not shut up. The president looked at him and assumed that they were looking at a traitor. Mansu spread his arms and declared that he had chosen the side of strength, and no one had the right to judge him. Now he was special. He looked around at those present and added that no earthling could defeat them, and this is only a small part of his invincible power. But they will forgive those who join their ranks. He immediately killed another one and added that the rest could refuse and die too. To avoid losing their lives, those present fell to their knees, declaring that they would follow him. The president sternly asked him if he didn't understand what he was doing. Mansu did not like these words, and he rushed at the president. But a soldier blocked his path, grabbing his arm. He asked the commander-in-chief for permission to deal with this guy himself. The soldier squeezed Mansu's fist so hard that he doubled over and cried out in pain. The soldier added that he was a private sergeant with experience in dungeon exploration. And as a soldier, he is obliged to destroy the traitor to humanity. He added that it was time to pay for the stupid decision. It was the first of 4 dark days, but people already knew that monsters were hiding among them. Military units arrived at the scene and attempted to destroy the monsters. Someone advised aiming for the heart for a sure kill, but the creature turned out to be smarter. It grabbed the car from the road and hid behind it. One of the tanks turned its gun towards the monster, and the commander was ready to give the order to destroy it. But then a man in armor appeared among the military and demanded that the order be cancelled. He rushed at the monster and dealt it a powerful blow. The stranger lifted the car and pulled it to a safe distance. Then the commander ordered to finish off the monster. There was an explosion, but the man in the car was rescued. When the monster was dealt with, the commander asked who he was, and the stranger replied that he was reinforcements. Rowan added that he is not alone. There are others. He stated that reinforcements were already on the way and asked not to shoot at civilians during a new attack. And then everyone saw a new army of creatures approaching them. Rowan explained that these are reinforcements. The military can use them as human shields. He added that similar units have been sent to other areas of the city. The commander turned to the soldiers, explained who was in front of them, and ordered them to take cover behind them. Ethan watched his tamed army, noting how harmoniously they worked with the humans. Suddenly he noticed something like a magic circle and realized that someone was about to appear, but who exactly remained unclear. Ethan told Mora that the circle was so strong that she would not be able to destroy it. She advised him to move away. A sorcerer or a higher-level creature could appear now. One girl managed to hide among the garbage bags and was about to call for help, but suddenly she heard heavy, inhuman breathing. Yesterday was a completely ordinary day, but today everything has changed. A wolf-like monster appeared near the landfill, slowly sniffing everything around. The girl held her breath so as not to give herself away. But the creature found her and already opened its huge mouth. Without thinking, the girl started running. She thought she had managed to escape, but she found herself surrounded by the same creatures. And suddenly a voice rang out, asking if she needed help. The stranger added that such a special girl should not die. When asked who he was, the guy replied that he was a villain. He became evil after being defeated by God. But, unlike the Almighty, he is able to fulfill her wish right now. The girl burst into tears, begging for salvation. The next second, the monsters around were finished, and the girl was safe. The guy appeared next to her and said that even though he was a demon, he was her savior. A minute later, everything became quiet, and he hugged her. He added that he would now move her to a safe place. Then he looked up and saw a huge dragon with a rider in the sky. He couldn't even imagine that he would meet a necromancer of such a level here. By that time, Ethan had collected a lot of materials and destroyed many monsters. The dragon landed near a boy holding a girl in his arms. Noctis calmly remarked to his master that this stranger did not look human. The stranger said that he had never met a necromancer of such a level and asked if he wanted to talk. Ethan replied that he was not sure whether the person in front of him was an enemy or not. The stranger introduced himself as Valifor, adding that he was very glad to meet him. Ethan looked at him closely. That was the name of the demon from Solomon's list, the 72nd deposed god, the Earl of Justice. Valifor noticed that the necromancer was not too surprised to see the archdemon in front of him. Ethan replied that he had already seen a lot of undead, monsters, dragons, and demons. Noctis quietly warned them that they shouldn't mess with him. They couldn't defeat the archdemon. Valifor continued to praise him, amazed at how he had achieved such heights at such a young age. He asked if the necromancer possessed purification magic. His treasure could not be left in such a state. The supreme demon said that he saved this girl, and now she belongs to him. He smiled and suggested moving to another place to talk. Valifor said that he offered to help the girl, and she agreed easily and quickly. Ethan asked why he was telling him all this. He replied that he wanted to be closer to the necromancer, even though he was inferior to him in strength. Moreover, the visions predicted a meeting with this particular magician, and it promised to be useful. Ethan was glad that, judging by these visions, he was still alive. He said that he had already encountered 2 powerful demons, but he saw no reason why they would help people. The supreme demon looked at him and asked who exactly he was fighting. Ethan told about Lucilla and the girl he met in the desert. The archdemon smiled, acknowledging that the opponents were indeed strong, and then said that he had a gift for the necromancer. In the box lay a monocle that could grant wishes. He added that the device can be used 3 times and help can be asked for at any time. Ethan accepted the gift gratefully and put the box in his pocket. Valifor told him about dark magic and the world of demons. He said that demons have been visiting the earth for over a century, but they appear only at the call of dark sorcerers. Then the archdemon looked at the girl and said that she was now very dear to him. Ethan asked how many dark magicians there are on Earth now, and heard that there are already more than 10,000 of them and the number is growing. Valifor added that he had a book with all the information about dark magic. The archdemon took out the book and handed it to the necromancer. Besides the book, he gave Ethan something like a pass. Ethan looked closer and saw the coordinates en route. Valifor added that they would be waiting for him at the appointed place and suggested that he drop by. He carefully took the girl in his arms and said that it was time to go. Later, Ethan met with the director. He immediately noticed that he looked unwell. The director said that the talisman had already been given, but there was something else. He added that he would soon leave for Indo, but for now Ethan could rest. The next second, the director coughed up blood. Ethan asked to tell him what was happening to him. The director replied that everything was fine and there was no need to worry. He then quietly admitted that his family had supported this country for generations, but he himself was tired of living for others. Many are ready to do anything just to save their skin. He will not allow the country to fall, but he does this only for his own sake. The director added that there would be other people in Indo, but they would not form a single team. Ethan replied that he understood everything and left with his team. The second day of hell arrived, and the military was ordered to collect the corpses of the slain monsters from the streets. The soldiers said they were paid well for it. These two decided to make some good money since they were killing these monsters themselves. And then they saw that the corpses of the monsters began to come to life and rise. They were brought back to life by an unknown force. Frightened, both soldiers abandoned their positions and ran away. Then a stone golem appeared, blocked the path of the revived creatures, and began to throw them aside. Ethan, watching this, noticed that these dead people were not so dead. But it was not worth interfering. Otherwise, they would have decided that it was his doing. Then Ethan decided to test someone. As a result of the infection, a new race emerged, the Jinn. It was a new creature, neither angel nor demon. Ethan summoned the tamed Ignis, who was delighted to finally get to work. Ignis was a genius of fire and could grant his master's wishes. Ethan ordered the burning of everyone except the people and those under his command. Ignis rose into the sky, and everything around was illuminated by a blinding light. Mora remarked that he would burn the entire city to the ground, and Ethan replied that Seoul would never be the same again. Ethan turned to Mora and reminded her that they were leaving for Indo tomorrow. Having finished his work, Ignis returned to his master and said that he wanted to look at the same magic circle. Looking down, he realized that the circle was calling someone. Ethan asked how much time they had, but the genie replied that they had no time at all and suggested they look around. And then Ethan saw that more of the same circles had appeared, and they all activated. The next moment, a huge creature, similar to a mammoth with glowing eyes, rose from under the ground. Ignis explained that this was the king of the earth, the lord of monsters, one of the two greatest beings on the planet, named Behemoth.